Aguero, Solskjaer, Deeney, Watkins. Sure, you know all about those last-minute goals, but have you heard the one about the on-loan goalkeeper who saved his temporary employers from disappearing out the Football League and into almost certain financial oblivion? Back in 1999, Carlisle United, managed by Nigel Pearson, were fighting to stay in the Football League. Carlisle's finances were precarious with a capital P that season, leading to a scenario where, with 3 games to go, they had to ask the FA to sanction an emergency loan deal to bring in a goalkeeper. Swindon Town's Jimmy Glass arrived at the club. His efforts in his first 2 games earned the Cumbrians 2 draws. Those vital points meant that Carlisle went into their final game of the Division 3 season, now League 2, needing to beat mid-table Plymouth Argyle in front of their own fans and hope their relegation rival Scarborough didn't win against Peterborough at home. The game at the McCain Stadium finished 1-1, and with the same scoreline at Brunton Park deep into injury time, Scarborough's fans invaded the pitch en masse, believing their Football League status was secure, convinced they'd done enough to stay up. However, there'd be one more plot twist. Carlisle won a corner in the dying seconds, and up came Jimmy Glass. In one of those you couldn't make it up moments, Glass scored from a rebounded header and was promptly swamped by teammates and thousands of fans who quite simply couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. As for Jimmy Glass, he became an overnight celebrity, but he never played for Carlisle again, and his playing career never really kicked on after that defining moment. He took on various jobs outside of football before finding his way back into the sport as player liaison officer at Eddie Howe's Bournemouth, and most recently the general manager at non-league Wimborne. Not the fairy tale ending to one of the most Hollywood moments in football, but the name Jimmy Glass will live on forever as the scorer of that goal, arguably the most important in any club's history.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Trans-Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly, back in my lofty Erie in Southern Ireland after a long sojourn in London. I'm delighted to say I'll be joined, as always, or sorry, at least so very often, by Andy Bressel. And what a cracking show we've got for you as the big leagues in Europe finally fire up for the new season. A season, of course, that not only has a Champions League in it, but leads to a World Cup as well. We're bringing you all the major stories from across the continent. We'll be going, what the hell's going on at Marseille? We'll talk about Bayern Munich kicking off their Bundesliga season, you guessed it, with a 6-0 win. And the new Serie A season starts this weekend. I'm watching the game between Juventus and Parma, and I'll tell you about a goal that's scored in the last 10 seconds very, very soon. We'll have Mbappe watch. Tim Vickery will join us from South America. Brian Sciaretta will join us from the United States as Donald Trump announces the arrangements for the World Cup draw, and we'll be reviewing the Champions League qualifier. We've got a great poll for you too. It should be a belting 3 hours. He's Andy Bressel. I'm Danny Kelly. This is Trans-Europe Express. You're the listening millions. How could life get better? Express. Yeah, good evening, Andy. How are you?
Good evening, Danny. I'm so well. How are you?
Really, really good. I had a lovely sojourn in London, met colleagues, did work, messed about in general, but now I'm back home, as they say, bringing it all back home. Andy, let's start then with our story of the week, which is, we're calling it Marseille's Mad Week. Last weekend, here on Trans-Europe Express, we were saying that after the first game of the season, bear in mind, this is Marseille, De Zerbi, and the first game of the season, there'd been a post-match punch-up, there'd been much disagreements, and now some of the names and the consequences of that, and footballers fight all the time, Andy, but this has really been taken very, very seriously, and it's leading to, well, things are unravelling after week 1 for Marseille.
Yeah, it has. And of course, a season which began with such high hopes for them. De Zerbi's first season in charge was a huge success. They made the Champions League and they'll be in the draw on Thursday. But that defeat at Rennes on the first day, when they played 10 men against 10 men for more than half the game, has really weighed on them. And it weighed on them from the minute they got back to the dressing room. There were words said, particularly to Jonathan Rowe, who's going to be a player in this, or perhaps not the biggest player in this, but certainly a player in this. The funny thing is, everyone will have heard by now, it was a fight between Adrien Rabiot and the English winger Jonathan Rowe, which led to both of them getting put on the transfer list. And Jonathan Rowe has since actually been sold. He joined Bologna officially today. Very nice Italian in the presentation video, but that's straying from the point a little bit. The detail that has come out on this brawl, though, apparent brawl, has been fascinating. Now, the funny thing is, the first thing that we learned is that the confrontation was initially between Geronimo Rulli, the goalkeeper, and Jonathan Rowe. Rabiot stepped in as the peacemaker, and before we know it, the pair of them are hitting each other in what was described as unprecedented violence by both the president, Pablo Longoria, and by the sporting director, Mehdi Benatia, who has seen some stuff in his career, by the way, which has seen Bayern Munich, Juventus, Marseille as a youth player, etc., etc., etc. So they're both stuck on the transfer list. And I guess the biggest thing straight away is the Rabiot camp's reaction. And you know where I'm going with this.
Well, let me just explain to the new listeners, because I'm sure there are millions joining us every week. If ever you talk about Adrien Rabiot, and we're not having a pop here. People choose their agents, I'm sure, very, very carefully. But Adrien Rabiot, of course, a World Cup winner and all the rest of it, his agent is his mum, Veronique. And Veronique is one of those people in the world who is not happy unless her view is front and centre of any discussion. And Andy, in this particular case, and very much playing to brand, she has waded right in.
Yeah, she certainly has. So she gave an interview this midweek with RMC, which is the main sports radio station, Radio Monte Carlo in France. And she said, if it was down to me, my son would have never signed for Marseille in the first place. That was first off. She talked about Longoria and Benatia and said their suits are too big for them. It's all about ego. And with Marseille, it's always about money. And for unprecedented violence, I didn't see anyone going to hospital after this fight. Now, funnily enough, someone nearly did go to hospital. One of the young Marseille players, a teenager, collapsed to the ground in the midst of this fight. That's what made it even more dramatic. So whether it was a panic attack or whatever, but he got medical attention and everything was fine in the end. But very, very unusual situation. The other thing, of course, if we're talking about the history of Veronique Rabio, and by the way, she also went on to criticise Roberto De Zerbi for welcoming Mason Greenwood into the team when he, in her words, hit his wife, which was something that De Zerbi later responded to in a press conference in the week, where he said, well, that was a non-work matter. What Rabio did was in the workplace. Speaking of which, when we talk about Veronique Rabio and previous fallouts includes at Euro 2020, which of course was in 2021, when France went out on penalties to Switzerland, when she argued with Kylian Mbappe's father in the crowd after they went out. Kylian Mbappe has just put Real Madrid in front, 1-0 at Oviedo. Defensive mistake, steered, a great finish into the far corner.
Meanwhile, in Turin, as I was saying at the start of the show, Juventus have taken over an hour to break down a pretty stubborn-looking Parma side, but they have, and you'll be unsurprised here, it's Jonathan David who has opened the scoring for them, Andy, after an hour. Juventus 1, Parma 0. We'll talk about what Juventus is going to do with their surplus strikers and their desired strikers a little later in the show. Okay, so all of that's gone on. Rabiot is still at the club. And we'll get on to how they got on at the football very soon, Andy. But having got rid of Jonathan Rowe, now De Zerbi has come out in public and without warning the powers that be at Marseille that he wants Rabiot back.
Yeah, it's extraordinary because Rabio had been on board with Longoria and with Benatia, and Benatia had said actually quite eloquently and at length how he had great admiration for Rabiot as a player and a person, and he liked him a lot as a person. And Rabiot is really popular at the club. I know he has a certain reputation, but not only was he brilliant on the field last season and in his final season with Juventus, and of course he's been linked with a move back there as well as other Italian clubs in the last couple of days. But that he just couldn't let this one pass. Now, De Zerbi backed him up in the press conference that preceded the weekend game against Paris FC. And then, after they'd beaten Paris 5-2, which is nowhere near as comfortable as it sounds, by the way, they were 2-0 up and frittered that lead. And they did miss Rabiot, as Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, one of the senior figures at the club, suggested they would. Again, he spoke very eloquently, as we've come to expect from him, and no punches pulled. He said, we'll be a weaker team without Rabiot. De Zerbi said after this game against Paris FC, I really hope the club's board and Rabiot could make it up, because we'd love to have him back. And whether he's been led by the feeling of the dressing room, because it's clear from what Højbjerg said that most of the players would love to have him back. You know, you're talking about someone who's arguably their best player just being removed from the team. Now, whether that is, as Veronique Rabio suggested, a financial imperative, because of course they paid him a lot of money to get him on board after he left Juventus. It was a big surprise when he arrived, especially given his PSG past last season. It's really difficult to imagine how they could replace him at this point in the transfer window.
Andy, I mean, this is fantastic. We've really covered this in great detail. Do we know yet what the row was about? Well,
it seems to have started. A few senior players had a word.
And the goalkeeper.
I think we talked about this last week. Yes, about Jonathan Rowe's work rate, apparently. Now, I have my doubts about this on a couple of levels. Firstly, it wasn't his greatest game. He wasn't the only Marseille player that you could put in that category. But Rui and a couple of others reportedly had a go at him for his implication or lack thereof. I find that quite extraordinary, because Rowe is a young player, still learning his trade. He's not a first pick for Marseille and never was. And he's someone who wouldn't have been starting that game had Igor Paschal, their big signing from Feyenoord, been fit and available to play. So I don't think a load of senior players effectively ganging up on him is a particularly great look. He seems to have handled it quite well. He's not talked any smack about Marseille in public, and fair play to him. He seems to have handled it very well, despite the fact this must have been a very difficult few days for him. I'm sure he'll do well at Bologna. In his good moments, he was really good, I thought, for Marseille. Scored a memorable winner at Lyon, going back 10, 11 months in a game there. So it feels to me that, going back to what Veronique Rabio said about this seems like quite a big overreaction to an incident, I wonder if there's something in that, because Rowe is someone who they completed a permanent deal for, but they've been shopping for a lot of this summer, and you know that is the truth of the matter. So whether that's the case, whether it's Adrien Rabiot's wages have become a bit onerous because they have spent more in the transfer market than a lot of their competitors in France, I don't know. But on a sporting level, they'd definitely be poorer without him.
Yes, and meanwhile, in the middle of all this is poor old Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who has seen a lot in a long and largely successful career. But he's been to a lot of clubs where stuff happens. He's probably sat in the dressing room going, "Oh God." He played well against Paris.
He did. He scored 2 goals. He was fantastic in his second Marseille home debut. And of course, Aubameyang being Aubameyang, he had the right to titter about it in front of the TV cameras when he talked about it afterwards. He said, you may have heard we've had a bit of a week, and then just had a big grin on his face. And only Aubameyang could get away with that, really.
Absolutely. Listen, thank you for that great story. Unless you're a Marseille fan, next up we'll cover everything else that's been happening in France. Some great results and interesting stories there as well. Of course they are, and you'll listen to them on Trans Europe Express. Yeah, you're listening to the self-same magnificent talkSPORT, and Sunday night means Trans-Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, and him, Andy Brassell. Andy, we're going to France next, but you're back, so of course France gets moved back up the running order. Our headline is pre-season PSG, because although they won on Friday night, they're still looking like a team a little bit short of a proper pre-season after their adventures in the Club World Cup.
Yeah, they were as rusty as one of our family cars in the 80s, I think it's fair to say. And, that has been the case for them so far. You wouldn't be surprised by that, of course. They've had no summer break, really. Famously, a week of training before they faced Tottenham in the Super Cup, and it really showed. Now, they played two inferior teams since then, of course, Nantes away and Angers away on Friday night, and just about crawled past both of them, 1-0 on both occasions. Now, our man Lee in the know in France tells us that they're the first team in, I think, maybe Liga history, I'd have to get that straight, to have not conceded a shot on target in their first two games, which is pretty remarkable. On the other hand, they have made quite heavy weather of it. Now, Ousmane Dembélé had a penalty in the first half after a foul on João Neves that he smashed miles over the top. It took Fabian Ruiz to open the game up, as he did in the Super Cup, as he does so often for them. In fact, PSG, because they've been so brilliant in the last year or so, it's very, very easy, especially in this calendar year, it's very easy to sort of want to pick out a superstar who's made it all happen. There are so many of them. I think maybe as more than any other team since Bayern Munich in 2013, who won the treble under Jupp Heynckes, they're a team where you think they're full of amazing players, but it's difficult to pick out one. At this moment, it feels like it's Fabian Ruiz, maybe because he's got the greatest motor. He looks in unbelievable nick at the moment, and some of them don't quite look their best, but he looks like someone who's going to affect the game every time. And he did with this goal early in the second half, a lead that they never really looked like losing, in honesty.
But Andy,
and when you think...
Yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say, when you think of the physical and mental load, 2 games, 6 points, no goals conceded, you can't really be arguing with that, can you?
No, you can't. But that's also the dream, isn't it? A team that plays as a team, but is armed everywhere with real weapons. That's what all managers eventually go for, isn't it? Or if they had the money, if they had the personnel, that's what you really, really want. But, Andy, and I can see a grin starting to play about your lips, as terrible writers always say. There is another team who are also unbeaten and have conceded no goals. It's Lyon.
Yeah, a team that, if we go back a month or so, were going to be a Ligue 2 team. They were going to be relegated for financial impropriety. Interestingly, the game against Metz at home was stopped for a bit yesterday, and the crowd were given a warning for chants and a banner that took aim at John Textor. Unless I'm very much mistaken, there weren't any swear words. Well, not in the banner anyway. No. But there were in the song, obviously. But it's remarkable, this idea that it could be considered offensive to call him a crook.
I mean,
that's what it said. But yeah.
Yeah, the things he's done. I mean, the authorities got to be very careful here. Nobody wants language or signs in grounds that are against the law, racist, homophobic, ridiculously aggressive, or all the rest of it. But if you can't tell the truth about stuff, then you really are struggling. And it is not the job of football clubs to police society at that level. There are rules,
no, exactly,
and we must follow those rules. But there's also an area in which people are allowed to express themselves. Now, when you told me that story the first time around, I was thinking this is definitely nudging into a kind of censorship here that you don't need in any part of life. There are plenty of rules and regulations already without making new ones up just because you don't like the truths that are being told. Speech ends, as we used to say at the BBC.
Before we leave Lyon, though,
I want to talk about their English connection.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to talk about, Danny. It's really interesting. The fact that we know Ainsley Maitland-Niles has been there doing a pretty good job, to the extent, actually, where they feel safe enough. They've got to raise a few more quid, of course, going into this last week of the transfer window. It looks like they're selling Sal Kumbedi, a specialist right back, simply because he's not going to get past Ainsley Maitland-Niles, who's been great for them over the last year and a half. And he comboed with Tyler Morton, who's just arrived from Liverpool. Brilliant first couple of performances from him. Morton opening up the defence, and the cross from Maitland-Niles tapped in by Corentin Tolisso, the captain, for the second goal in that game. And Tyler Morton has really, really impressed everyone so far.
Then we turn next, Andy, to Rennes, who, after being sort of, I guess you'd say, out of the spotlight, under the radar last week, because they were the team who were involved while Marseille went into meltdown. This week they've gone to Lorient, and they played Lorient, and it is, for football aficionados of football chaos, one of the great terrible performances of all time.
It really was. They were down to 9 men, after 11 minutes, which is quite an effort. So you think of in the first two games,
chapeau.
In the first two games of this Liga season, they've not got to half time with 11 men. They've got 3 players sent off before half-time in the first 2 games, which is quite an effort. A particular applause for Mady Camara, who rejected a move to Nice at the last minute to go to Rennes. He was making his debut today, sent off after 6 minutes for a chest-high studs-up challenge. Off he went. Christopher Wu was sent off for a professional foul just after that. But it looked like they were going to hold out till half-time. They even had a chance to take the lead. Seko Fofana hit the crossbar from way out. He's brilliant at his best, although he's not quite hit it for Rennes so far. But they conceded a goal in the 4th of 6 minutes of stoppage time. Stoppage time, of course, which was added for their sendings off, and the VAR picking a part of it, which is quite ironic. I mean, obviously, when they conceded a goal early in the second half, it all fell to bits from there.
Sure.
4th goal, incidentally, scored by Theo Lebris, who is the nephew of Regis, the Sunderland manager.
Oh, thank you very much. I had not made that connection. Thank you. Well done, the players of Rennes. That's the way to start the season off.
Look implicated.
I suppose, it looked like you're committed to the cause. Get sent off in the first 10 minutes. I suppose the argument will be in the dressing room. We'll put that one behind us. It can't get any worse than that. We must go. There's only room for improvement. Who's your star of the week, Andy? So I want to talk about mine a little bit.
Well, while we're on the red cards, I'm going to go for Donovan Lyon, who is one of the underrated goalkeepers of Liga, plays for Auxerre. And he, in the first game of the season, great achievement. It became the 10th season in which he'd started a league game for Auxerre. Only other player who's ever done that for Auxerre. And think of all the brilliant players they had, particularly when they were really good at the start of the century. The only other player who did that for them was the Swiss defender Stefan Grichting. And that was quite a way back. Like, he played games in the Champions League for them. And so how did Donovan Lyon celebrate? He got himself sent off, of course. Away at Nice. Donovan.
Well, my star of the week is Emmanuel Omega, who plays for Strasbourg. Now, first of all, those of you of a certain vintage remember an infamous miss by Ronnie Rosenthal for Tottenham against Southampton, I seem to recall, where he missed from the middle of the goal from 3 yards out. And people were saying that what Omega done was a pure Rosenthal against Nantes today. However, 1 minute later, he got a chance to redeem himself, a much more difficult chance, which he absolutely buried. So he's my star of the week. But Andy, I want to talk to you about Strasbourg briefly here, because last week and this week, we've seen that Chelsea have got a very, very young team. There's lots of younger, but the game is getting young again now, isn't it? The idea of putting young players into a team and not necessarily always backing them up with a few old lags is catching on, I think, throughout European football as the game becomes more physical. But Strasbourg, amazing. Last week and this week, including Emmanuel Omega, they put out a side all entirely born for the first time in the top 5 leagues in Europe, all entirely born in this century. Incredible. Makes you feel very old.
Yeah, a little bit. And Omega, he was the captain today, so he is one of said old lags at 22 years of age. It'd be really interesting to see what happens to him next. Scored goals at a reasonable lick last season. He's big, he's fast, he's intelligent, he can link play. Decent finisher despite the earlier miss, which he more than made up for, as we said, with that winner against Nantes. Now, I've seen him suggested as someone who might end up at a few different Premier League clubs. He won't. It will be Chelsea, of course, because of the Blue Co connection.
The Strasbourg link.
And I think he could do really, really well in the Premier League Dutch. So I would imagine his future is wearing the blue of Chelsea, becoming a full Netherlands international so they don't have to pick Wout Weghorst anymore, because he's 6'5" too.
Andy, let me just tell you, it's all happening in Turin. Juventus were beating Parma by a goal to nil. Then they had Cambiasso sent off. But within a minute of that, and this is something we'll be talking about later in the show, the ghost of Dusan Vlahovic has got a goal coming off the bench, I think, for Juventus. So Juventus 2, Parma 0. What you got go? What's the score of the latest with Real Madrid?
Well, it's still 1-0 to Real Madrid at half-time.
Is that why you made that animalistic noise? Or was that
yeah, that'll be it. No, that was Vlahovic. We're into the last 5 minutes in northern France. It's been quite an entertaining game, actually, despite the fact it remains Lille 0, Monaco 0. Two teams that could look quite different by the end of the transfer window, I reckon. Eric Dyer's had another great game, just before you ask.
Well, and he's my king. Andy, thank you very much indeed for that. When we come back in a few seconds' time, we'll have a club focus for you. And we don't apologise for this. I know Bayern Munich are in an eternal spotlight, but things are changing at a very profound level at the Bavarian club. And their amazingly easy Friday night first win in the Bundesliga, I think, is absolutely illustrative. We'll talk about Bayern Munich next here on Trans Europe Express.
League teams have got a load of crazy nicknames. Ever wondered where they came from? Some are pretty straightforward. Arsenal are the Gunners because they were founded by a group of munitions workers, and Bournemouth are the Cherries because their old stadium was built right next to a cherry orchard. Then there's Everton. They're dubbed the Toffees, but why? Well, because when the club was formed, just down the road there were two local toffee shops. Ipswich Town nicked their nickname off their opponents in the late 90s, Birmingham. The term Tractor Boys was chanted as a way to tease the team about their farming background, but they started using it themselves as a way to cheer on the team in victory instead. Take that, Birmingham. Let's head to Leicester, famous for more than just a red, well, orangey cheese and Jamie Vardy. Leicestershire's also the birth.
Yeah, we've got a poll for you as well. We'll get on to Bayern Munich in just a second, but today's poll is it's a Twitter poll, of course it is. Which of these non-Premier League players will score the most goals in the Champions League this season? The draw, of course, is Thursday. So which of these players, we're not counting the Premier League players because obviously Brennan Johnson will be scoring the most of those. Which of these players will be scoring the most goals in the Champions League this season? And the four choices you've got are Kylian Mbappe, Harry Kane, Lamine Yamal, and Ousmane Dembele. Already a lot of people have voted, but you can change the current standings. Just go to X/Twitter. You can go to @talkSPORT, @DannyKellyWords, or @Andy Brassell, 2 S's and 2 L's to vote and have your say. That's that. Andy, we want to move on to talk about Bayern Munich. But first, Andy, you wanted to talk very briefly about a former Bayern Munich player. We're back to Eric Dyer again.
Yeah, there was a great moment there where Eric Dyer and Nabil Bentaleb both rowing with the referee at the same time. Of course, Bentaleb, who's come back from cardiac arrest to play for Lille. It's an incredible story and what a strange career he's had. So lovely to see old Tottenham coming together on the Liga pitch. But it's from the other side of North London that the decisive contribution has been made. Lille lead 1-0. Olivier Giroud has scored in stoppage time on his home debut.
Wow, it's like a mad North London derby, that, isn't it? Wow. So let's turn then to Bayern Munich, not without their own North London connection, of course, these days. On Friday, Andy, they opened their campaign, I thought, with a dreadful precedence for the rest of the league against a Leipzig side that would hope to be challenging for Europe. The score was Bayern 6, Leipzig 0. Now, Andy, I've got a bit of theorising to do here, and I'm going to put this to you, and you're going to tell me how right I am or how wrong I am. The goals were all scored by former Premier League players. Harry Kane got 3, Michael Olise got 2, and Luis Diaz got the other goal. And this, to me, Andy, illustrates, I think, finally, what I've already sort of been able to tell with my own eyes over the past 2 to 3 years. Bayern Munich have joined the super elite of European clubs. They used to think it would be possible to compete at the very top just by taking the very best German talent. And of course, for decades, they've done exactly that and with great success. But now they've turned to buying players at great expense, in the case of all three of those footballers, from the Premier League. They are, I suppose you'd call them, not just Bundesliga ready, but Champions League ready. It's a big change for Bayern Munich.
Yeah, it is. And if you go back 13 years to, we were talking about the Bayern treble winning side of Jupp Heynckes. Remember, one of the key pieces of that was Javi Martinez. And so they could pay the 40 million euros to buy him out from his Athletic Bilbao contract, because, of course, you only ever buy out players from Athletic. There is no negotiating because
Superb,
of the way
what
that they
club.
do things. It is. But, of course, at this point, Bayern couldn't stretch to 40 million euros. Their success was generally built on low transfer fees and big wages. So when they went and bought Javi Martinez, they needed to be subbed by Adidas. Adidas needed to pay some of the money for them. Of course, they've enjoyed such a brilliant relationship with Adidas for decades. And that's what got one of the key pieces of the treble winning side in that treble winning side. Now, of course, since then, as you say, it's evolved. We've had Luke Hernandez, Harry Kane, of course, Michael Olise, and now Luis Diaz. And to have big players coming across 2 years out of 3 from the Premier League, and that's if we're not including Joao Palhinha, a signing that didn't really work out for them
But
last
might well
summer.
have done, yeah, of course.
He could have gone to, I guess, another bigger than Fulham Premier League club. I think it's safe to assume. And he didn't. He chose to go to Bayern Munich. I think this tells us how trends are self-perpetuating in football, really. So I don't just think it's Kane, although Kane is important in this story. It's a move that I think going into his third season, still shocks German football a little bit that it actually happened, even though he's been a roaring success while he's been there. It's something that was completely unprecedented. And now to have two players who the Premier League clubs in question, giant Premier League clubs with lots of money, both wanted to keep, but couldn't, from Bayern. That feels like a massive sea change for me. And of course, they were both influential in this game. Luis Diaz scoring his first goal for Bayern. He'd scored the winner in the Super Cup as well. And of all the great wingers that Bayern have had, none have scored goals in huge volume. It feels like Diaz could buck that trend already. Brilliant finish for the second goal that kind of mopped this goal up. In between Michael Olise's two first half goals. And again, he's coming to the fore more with no Jamal Musiala in the team as well. Funnily enough, it was another former Premier League player, Serge Gnabry, who was playing in the Musiala spot in the 10 in this game. So even with the fact that they've lost some big players, including Thomas Muller, including the injury of Musiala, including Leroy Sané going to Galatasaray this summer, and Harry Kane actually said last week that they were looking a little thin. They've still got an embarrassment of riches, and of course Kane mopping it all up with his hat trick in the second half of this game, which I know a lot of you will have seen because it was great to see it on British TV as well.
And we can now say that Munich are very definitely a Bayern club, aren't they? Ha 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 ha. Buying. Oh, you're not buying that? All right. Let me just tell you about the game. I know. Maybe I didn't tell it properly. The game in Turin is over. It's Juventus 2, Parma 0. But I really want to have a quick talk about this as well. Of course, start of a new season, we get to see all the new kits. And this game has been absolutely beautiful to watch in terms of that. Parma, of course, they're not on the television as often as other clubs. They've been yo-yoing up and down the league as well. But their kit, of course, is so redolent of their famous Parmalat kit from the 80s and 90s, from Football Italia and all the rest of it. They look great. But I have to say this, and I very rarely say this about Juventus. Juventus look absolutely beautiful. They have got the pink detailing of their second, or is it third kit, incorporated now into the usual habitual black and white of their kits. It look just in the sponsor's stripes and in a tiny bit around the badge. It looks fantastic, the pink and black and white. Really, really good indeed. But nothing has caught my eye as much as the Juventus training tops. The tops you wear now to differentiate you from the players on the pitch when you're warming up. And they are kind of baby pink, baby yellow, and baby blue. Irregular stripes and patterns. They look absolutely fantastic. Somebody, after that terrible redesign of the Juventus logo a few years ago, has decided to up their game. They look absolutely brilliant. They also got a very nice goal there for Vlahovic, reminding you that if you put the ball in front of him, in front of the goal, he can still be a very, very good player. And I suspect, as he does seem to be not wanted on journey there, particularly if they get Kolo Muani, we'll talk about that later, that somebody in the Premier League will take a gamble on this fella. Otherwise, Andy's going to end up in Turkey, isn't he? Where are Bayern Munich? You're right to say that Harry Kane, after the Super Cup and before the 6-0 win against Leipzig, Harry was of the opinion that they weren't entirely equipped for the new season. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear the follow-up from that. He said it was one of the smallest squads he'd played in. And bearing in mind that Bayern, at least resource-wise, is a step up from Tottenham, and squad-wise is a step up from Tottenham, that seemed quite an interesting thing to say. Now, off the back of that, of course, we know that now they're not signing Nick Woltemade, but as well, it looks like they won't be paying for any signings between now and the end of the season, now and the January, because the sporting director, Max Eberl, he came out and said, look, I would love to sign one more before we get to deadline, but we've spoke to the board about it and it's only going to be a loan. So they're looking to loan a player, someone unwanted between now and then, which I think is a really interesting state of affairs, really. So we'll see what transpires there. I mean, obviously, if they were to sell someone, say an unwanted defender, say Kim Min-jae, for example, then that might change things. But if they're going to do that, they're going to have to make it happen pretty quickly before they're out of time. Out of time also at Monaco. It is finished in northern France. Dramatic end when Lille got a penalty on the break. Olivier Giroud, who scored that brilliant, as it turns out to be, winning goal on the turn, smashed into the top corner. He took the penalty, smashed it a mile over the top, and just after that, Mika Biret, of course, the London-born striker who came through the academy at Arsenal's, played a lot in Scottish football, scored a lot of goals for Sturm Graz and scored a ton of goals on his arrival at Monaco. He had a great chance to make it 1-1 with the last kick of the game, couldn't get it on target, finishes 1-0. Olivier Giroud gets the winner on his home debut for Lille.
Andy, since apparently Daniel Levy, Johan Langer and all the rest of them at Spurs can't get a transfer across the line, I'll take up the cudgels. I think Spurs need a backup right back because Jed Spence is playing so well on his wrong foot at left back. Would they sell Spurs Sacha Boey?
I don't know if they would, no. Because of the injury situation they have at the moment. I don't think I think they'd like to sell Sacha Boey, but I don't think they dare, given where their squad is at the moment. I just think
he hasn't broken into their team, but there's a good footballer in there, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. There's a really good footballer in there, and he's had a lot of injuries since he's arrived, mainly muscle injuries. Once he gets past that, I still think he could establish himself at Bayern. And because they're, I think, thinner at the back than at the front, despite popular reasoning, that he'll get his chances.
Yeah, they can't afford to have Kimmich playing right back anymore, can they? They just can't. Listen, when we come back in a few seconds' time, we'll talk about the rest of Germany. Some brilliant stories there, including Dortmund doing very, very Dortmund things in their opening game of the season. Yeah, you're listening to Trans-Europe Express here on talkSPORT with me, Danny Kelly, and Andy Brassell. Right, we talked about Bayern Munich. What about the rest, the runners and riders in the Bundesliga? They also have kicked off their season. And Andy, Well, Dortmund could not have been more on brand. On the pitch and off it, stuff happening, not all of it, or very little of it, to the advantage of the actual football club. Let's start with on the pitch, where they were strolling to a victory against St. Pauli.
And yet, yeah, they were 3-1 up in what had been a difficult game with 5.
I got to watch that as well. It's great that the German games are on the telly, isn't it?
Yeah, it is great, and they were looking for comfy-ish, I suppose, as you would with like a 2-goal lead. And then I guess the sort of foul that wouldn't have got detected in the pre-VAR era, which was made by their debutant centre-back, Filippo Mane, and he was quite rightly sent off, and St. Pauli given a penalty, which Daniel Sinani put away. And then Eric Schmidt, who always seems to score a banger against Borussia Dortmund, he's done it before. I'm sure he'll do it again. The Swede ploughed in an equaliser from miles out. And you know what Niko Kovac is like afterwards. He said, we have to be happy with the point, with the way we played, which I think is about as brutal as maybe his players deserved. It felt like a game, though, in many ways from the 70s. There was so much on-pitch confetti. It was sort of like melting snow.
Lovely. Very,
very unusual. It was like from the 1978 World Cup or something like that.
The ticker tape in Argentina, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It could only happen at Milan. It could only happen at St. Pauli. But anyway, afterwards... not a happy camp, and not a happy English part of the camp as well, because Joe Bellingham had started the game. He hadn't had his best game. He was taken off at half time, and his camp apparently not that happy with his dad, Mark, who's one of his key advisors, there at the game, and coming through to the dressing rooms after full time to reportedly express his disappointment about the performance and ask why Joe was taken off at half time. Now, Sebastian Kehl, of course, was a title winner under Klopp and is now the sporting director. Yeah. He addressed this afterwards. So he didn't talk about the content of the conversation between him and Bellingham Senior or other members of the coaching and staff and board about Bellingham Junior. But he did say, look, it was a mistake. He was let through and the Bellinghams were let through because they're known to the security staff, so they were just allowed to come in. But the dressing room and the corridors around it after the game are not for friends and family. They're just for players, officials, directors, coaching staff, etc. So a tricky, quite awkward start there. I don't know what motivated it. I don't know if it's because... it feels like there's a lot of pressure on Joe Bellingham already, which there shouldn't be.
Really unfair.
I mean, it's not like he has to start every game from the get-go, but maybe that's not his family's feeling. And Niko Kovac, who is someone who does not take kindly to any sort of interference, which makes him a weird sort of fit for Dortmund, where there are so many voices that want to say something that they've tried to streamline during this summer. I think it's really interesting to see how this relationship goes, because obviously they've already had a relationship with the club from when Jude was there. But of course, that doesn't mean they're going to have the same relationship and Job is going to have the same experience at Dortmund as Jude did. And I think it's unreasonable to expect that.
And of course, they're there. Perhaps you could argue slightly, everybody's different. I think you're saying the story can't necessarily be the same. Let's talk about two of the clubs. We saw what happened to Leipzig. Let's talk about two of the clubs who will be hoping to at least keep on the shirt tails of Bayern Munich for a respectable amount of time in the new German season. Perhaps more likely than Bayer Leverkusen this year are Eintracht Frankfurt, Andy, who started with an excellent 4-1 win against Werder Bremen, and also, to back up something I was saying earlier on, have let loose the youth.
Yeah, they certainly have. Now, look, I think the fact that Frankfurt are unbelievable developers and sellers of players under Markus Krösche, the sporting director, is no longer a secret. They're Bundesliga Brighton and everyone knows it. But, I mean, they are really veering into self-parody now. Now, of course, Dino Topmüller, the coach, had said when Ugo Ekitike went to Liverpool, oh, he's irreplaceable. There's nothing we can do. He's the one guy we can't replace. Well, I think it's a perfect time to undercut him, to absolutely batter Werder Bremen on the first day of the season, 4-1. And the two key players in it, Can Uzun, who came across, two players who came across in 2024 and had a difficult-ish first season, I guess a season of adaptation. Him and Gian Matteo Boia, the young Frenchman who, again, they joined from, I guess, smaller, unfashionable clubs in their home countries, Nuremberg and Angers last year, and had a handover season last season. Uzun, only 19 years old, Boia, 20. Uzun scored the opener with an absolute rip snorter from miles out, and then he set up the next two for Boia, and they made it look all so easy. And because we know what's going to happen next, one of the journalists asked Can Uzun afterwards, well, they're going to sell you for 100 million next season, aren't they? And he went, well, I've only played like one game so far this season. You know, it's a bit early to be saying that. But I think the fact that people feel comfortable in verbalizing that sort of thing rather than just saying it behind closed doors shows what a reputation Eintracht Frankfurt have, and also that they're able to fulfill that reputation. Now, interestingly, when we go backwards and we're talking about Joe Bellingham there, he was really impressed with Eintracht Frankfurt and he considered them. They were on his list. James McAtee, before he signed for Nottingham Forest, came over, spoke to Eintracht Frankfurt, was super impressed with the facilities. Now, we talked about how Bayern had changed things up. I wonder if Eintracht Frankfurt managed to do that in the next year or two. If because they become so synonymous with developing players and delivering them to absolute elite level, like has happened with Ekitike. I mean, I don't think I've seen a centre-forward who's arrived in the Premier League looking more ready, certainly at that age. I wonder if the next generation or next year's McAtees and Jobs start looking at Eintracht Frankfurt and thinking, right, I'm not just interested, I'm going to do it. You know, that is a bit of me. If they end up in like a year or two's time with like a McAtee or a Cole Palmer or, you know, the next Jadon Sancho or something like that, that really affects the balance of power in the Bundesliga, I think.
Andy, let me just give you a big story that's going on in America in live sport. It's the last big tournament of the season in the American golf, the FedEx Cup, because we're heading now to the Ryder Cup and all the rest of it. Tommy Fleetwood, the English golfer we know, has never won on the American tour, but has earned $40 million because he's always in the top three, the top four. Tommy is in the latter stages. He's on the 14th hole in the FedEx. He's 3 shots ahead. So once again, and for the second time in the last 3 weeks, he's heading for the latter stage of this tournament with a decent lead, and he may break his duck. I'll keep you across that during the next hour or so here on Trans Europe Express. Tommy Fleetwood on his way possibly to his first ever win on the United States, on the PGA Tour, which would be amazing given how consistent he's been. I'll give you my star of the week first, Andy. My star of the week in Germany, where I should make the point that Bayer Leverkusen lost 2-1 at home to Hoffenheim. They were awful, but they were breaking in 6 new players, is Lukas Kwasniok, actually, the new coach of FC Cologne, newly promoted themselves. They won 1-0 at Mainz in the last minute, which is great. But the manager, we're talking about new shirts, wore a replica shirt rather than a suit and tie or a tracksuit on the touchline. Obviously, he had to wear, they were wearing their away kit. He had to wear the home kit so he didn't clash with the players. But he just said, I just love this club and I love these colours. And I tip my hat to him. Who was your star of the week, Andy?
Well, I'm going to go for the Japanese centre-back, Koki Mashida. Now, he had a brilliant game as Hoffenheim didn't smash and grab. Even though they went a goal down, they thoroughly deserved to win at Leverkusen, who, as you said, were terrible. Mashida was really good, but it turns out he did his ACL in that game, and he's going to be out for the rest of the season. So all the best for him. Only just arrived from Union Saint-Gilloise as well. Such a shame.
That is, as I say, injuries and I hate about professional football. You know, I can dislike players for all kinds of reasons, but they then when they're injured, it's just such a waste of human talent. Listen, that's been an absolutely dynamic first hour, and if I say so myself, absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Stick with us, everybody, because we've got another 2 hours of this award-winning stuff coming your way here on talkSPORT.
Aguero, Solskjaer, Deeney, Watkins. Sure, you know all about those last-minute goals, but have you heard the one about the on-loan goalkeeper who saved his temporary employers from disappearing out the Football League and into almost certain financial oblivion? Back in 1999, Carlisle United, managed by Nigel Pearson, were fighting to stay in the Football League. Carlisle's finances were precarious with a capital P that season, leading to a scenario where, with 3 games to go, they had to ask the FA to sanction an emergency loan deal to bring in a goalkeeper. Swindon Town's Jimmy Glass arrived at the club. His efforts in his first 2 games earned the Cumbrians 2 draws. Those vital points meant that Carlisle went into their final game of the Division 3 season, now League 2, needing to beat mid-table Plymouth Argyle in front of their own fans and hope their relegation rival Scarborough didn't win against Peterborough at home. The game at the McCain Stadium finished 1-1, and with the same scoreline at Brunton Park deep into injury time, Scarborough's fans invaded the pitch en masse, believing their Football League status was secure, convinced they'd done enough to stay up. However, there'd be one more plot twist. Carlisle won a corner in the dying seconds, and up came Jimmy Glass. In one of those you couldn't make it up moments, Glass scored from a rebounded header and was promptly swamped by teammates and thousands of fans who quite simply couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. As for Jimmy Glass, he became an overnight celebrity, but he never played for Carlisle again, and his playing career never really kicked on after that defining moment. He took on various jobs outside of football before finding his way back into the sport as player liaison officer at Eddie Howe's Bournemouth, and most recently the general manager at non-league Wimborne. Not the fairy tale ending to one of the most Hollywood moments in football, but the name Jimmy Glass will live on forever as the scorer of that goal, arguably the most important in any club's history.
Yeah, welcome back to the second hour of 3 of tonight's edition of Trans-Europe Express. During the next 60 minutes, we'll be bringing you all the news from Spain, really interesting stories there, and Italy. And Andy will be trying to unravel some of the transfers that may happen from the continent, either to other continental clubs or into the Premier League, with just a week to go of the transfer window. Before we move on to you-know-what involving Real Madrid, let me just tell you that I should have kept my mouth shut. Tommy Fleetwood has dropped a shot at the 15th, which means he has a 2-shot lead over Patrick Cantlay, the American, with 3 holes to play. Amazing round early on by the man who's currently in 3rd place, Corey Connors, the Canadian golfer, who went round today in 62. But Tommy Fleetwood still has that 2-shot lead with 3 holes to play. And Andy, I think you've got a bit of breaking news involving inevitably Lyon.
Yeah, that's right. According to L'Equipe, Facundo Buonanotte, who Brighton are looking to loan again, wants to join Lyon, and he's agreed to join Lyon. The twist being that Brighton would prefer to loan him elsewhere in the Premier League so they can get him ready for their first team. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of days.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Time now for this.
carrière le Paris Saint-Germain. Mbappé! Et Mbappé!
Little give and go. Mbappe's in. Oh, it's 2-2. He scored twice in 2 minutes.
Tête de Kylian Mbappé. Allez, Kylian!
Yeah, sorry, I've got some bias in this. On the next hole that they're doing, which is the 16th, Cantlay has driven into some pretty heavy-looking grass. I am biased. I want Tommy Fleetwood to win. I think he's a fantastic bloke, fantastic golfer, and I love his 1970s rock star haircut, a haircut that I could no longer attempt myself. Cantlay, as I say, has just driven on the 16th, and so has Fleetwood now, and he is in the fairway. So I'll keep you up to date as they head towards the 16th green there in the FedEx Cup, the hugely remunerative but important last tournament of the series. So Kylian Mbappe got the winning goal, Andy, but not before he was being accused by Real Madrid's opponents, Osasuna, of, quote, cheating.
Yeah, this was on a Tuesday night. Real Madrid and Osasuna, the last two La Liga teams to start the La Liga season. And it was tight. You know, Real Madrid took their time to break through, dominated, but didn't steamroll at Osasuna. I think it's fair to say. And Osasuna had started that game pretty well. 0-0 at half-time. A few minutes into the second half, it looked a pretty clear-cut penalty on Kylian Mbappe, analysed by VAR, given in the end. He puts it away to give them the win. And, of course, we'll come on to the fact that he scored the only goal as stands tonight with 15 minutes left away at Oviedo. But Osasuna reacted in, like, they were upset. They felt that rather than Mbappe being taken over, he just left his foot in, initiated the contact himself, and then gone down. And they felt that should have been that should have been detected by VAR. I think it is quite difficult to tell. I think when the penalty was given, it's one of those ones that wouldn't get overturned in the Premier League. Put it that way. And I think we've seen for various seasons in various cases, overanalysis is not great. But you know, there's always the argument.
It's pointless as well, really. The only issue I don't think you can ever do is that hopefully it will improve the VAR and the referees' reaction to things, you know, if they see that there are ways of looking at things, you know. But otherwise, what's the point about getting on your high horse about it?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Danny, I think that the problem is in Spanish football is everyone involved is keeping score. That's the problem, whether you're Osasuna, whether you're Real Madrid. I mean, you had a penalty being given against Barcelona yesterday, and it always makes me amused when Real Madrid and Barcelona trying to argue that there's a refereeing conspiracy against them. But Pedri, talking about the penalty that was given against Barcelona yesterday at Levante, he brought up a penalty that was not given for them against Real Madrid last season. It's like, God, life's too short for this, surely.
Yeah,
that's not how a lot of people feel, obviously.
But Andy, Trans Europe Express is one of those places where we can have this discussion. One of the things that I love the game of football, but there are things about it that I don't like, of course. It's like anything else. I profoundly love the game. One of the things I can't stand now is because of partially because of VAR, but it was before VAR as well, and partially because, as you say, everyone's keeping score. There are certain grounds in the Premier League particularly, I won't name them because I don't want to get into a row just now about that, where the game has been reduced from a contest between two lots of 11/16 players to the home fans screaming every time the ball goes into the opposition penalty area for imaginary fouls, made-up handballs, and incidents that they want reviewed by VAR. It's you can hear it on some of the grounds. That's the most appropriate way to get a victory in their minds, or the most likely way, is to just harass the referee and the officials into giving you a decision. It's tiring listening to it on some of the Premier League grounds. Let them get on with it. You know, bad as they sometimes can be, human as though it sometimes can be, just howling for penalties and handballs. And you know which club, not you, I'm talking to the actual fans now, you know which clubs this thing really, really goes on at. So the game against Osasuna during the week was noted for Trent Alexander's debut. Plus, did Franco 2-0. The new Argentinian wonder kid. Did he make his debut in that game or today?
He did make his debut in that game. He started the game today, Oviedo. Alexander-Arnold didn't. He was replaced by Dani Carvajal, as you might expect for an away game in the early part of the season, at a fairly inhospitable environment. But Mastantuono's debut at the Bernabeu was an interesting one. Firstly, because he's only just arrived, and secondly, because Osasuna were looking into the possibility that he might have been incorrectly registered, and they might be asking for the game to be played again, actually. So
let me guess, he's so young, he's registered with their reserve team.
Yeah, he's registered with Castilla and not for Real Madrid. They were arguing. I mean, it seems a little bit like clutching at straws, but of course, all the bad blood in it is what makes La Liga.
Yes, it does indeed. Interesting selection tonight, Andy. Vinicius Jr. didn't start. As you say, Trent Alexander-Arnold didn't start, but Rodrigo did. And after what seems like an entire closed season of speculation about where the brilliant Brazilian might go, the answer might be nowhere.
I think that seems most likely. The reports coming out of Madrid this week is that Real Madrid have decided to keep him. And as he's a very Xabi Alonso sort of player, it makes me feel that would be the wise thing to do. Of course, at the moment, I don't think they can really make a decision until they come to a conclusion about what happens with Vini Junior's contract. Now, look, I think he'll probably end up staying at Real Madrid, because even though there's a gap between what the club are prepared to offer and what he actually wants at the moment. And talking of Vinny, he's just been booked for the most outrageous dive attempting to win a penalty. Until they've come to that decision over whether he stays or goes, and, you know, if he'd have wanted to go to Saudi Arabia by now, surely he would have done. I think they're wise to hold on to Rodrigo just in case. No wonder, no matter what happens as well.
Yeah, and of course these things they're all tied up with little strings, aren't they? Because if Spurs really want to give Manchester City a fortune for way above what is actually, I think, worth for Savinho, City will only sell him, we understand, if they can get Rodrigo to replace him. If Rodrigo doesn't go from Madrid, then that's another transfer avenue cut off from the North London side. Overall, Andy, what
Danny,
kind of
one that I would suggest, and no one's really mentioned this, I wonder if Brahim Diaz might be good for that role for Spurs. I mean, you're looking at a guy who's 26, who turns like most big games that he plays, who, despite his size, is courageous on the ball. He can open teams up, scores important goals, won a title in 3 different countries, already knows what the Premier League's like because of his time with Manchester City. Why not make an offer? Especially with Arda Güler coming through. You know, he's not starting with Jude Bellingham not in the picture at the moment. So I think make Brahim a little offer.
Well, I don't have anything against that. Of course, Real Madrid are involved in every pie. Spurs' next choice for that 10 that they've so far failed to sign. In fact, they need 2 of them now with the news that Kulusevski's injury is going to keep him out till the new year. Must be starting to affect his World Cup chances if we ain't careful. Is Nico Paz at Como, who Spurs are going to offer a fortune for in the next couple of days. But he, of course, is half owned by Real Madrid, and they don't want him to go to Tottenham. So, as I say, it's a spider's web for everybody, and Real Madrid, as so often, are at the centre of it. Listen, thank you very much indeed for that, Andy. That was Mbappe Watch for this week. And as always...
And it's 2-0, by the way. It's 2-0. Kylian Mbappe scored again.
Thank you very much. That's how Mbappe Watch works. When we come back, and we'll continue to talk about football in Spain, including the news, I guess not unexpected. I mean, I remember waiting for the Spurs stadium to be finished. Wasn't Everton Stadium beautiful today, by the way? Let's be truthful. That's the second best stadium story this weekend in English football. We'll come on to the best one in a second. But next, we'll be looking at football in Spain, where Barcelona look nowhere near ready to move into the new camp. Yeah, Spanish football now. But let me just tell you, back there in the United States at the FedEx Cup on the 16th, Patrick Cantlay has bogeyed the 16th, which restores Tommy Fleetwood's 3-shot lead as they head into the last 2 holes of this hugely prestigious tournament. As I say, the issue here is that Fleetwood has won $40 million on the American Tour without winning a single one of these actual tournaments. And once again, it's very much in his hands as he makes his way to the tee on the 17th. I'll keep an eye on that for you as well. Our headline for Spain, Andy, is no new camp now. No new camp now. Because Barcelona, and of course, these construction projects inevitably, well, not inevitably, Everton didn't, but inevitably tend to overrun. It's really interesting because, of course, this affects how Barcelona can play in La Liga for the first part of this season. Equally, how they can play for the Champions League group stages, the draw for which is Thursday. So it's all coming over the hill very, very quickly, and they're not ready.
Yeah, that's right. They're meant to be in for the weekend, and officially they're going to be in for the weekend is the line of when they play the home game against Valencia, which is the weekend of the 13th, 14th of September. But it seems they haven't even applied for the planning permits for the test event yet. Now, they've had some inspections this week, which we don't yet know the result of. But as we've been aware for a while, this is a stadium that is far from finished. We knew that after phase 1, Barcelona would move back in. Then there would be phase 2, at which the stadium would be 2/3 open before we get to the final completed thing about a year and a half down the line. But it seems that the original timescales, surprisingly enough, were really unrealistic. Bear in mind that Barcelona were meant to be in there just before Christmas. That wasn't the case. They played it out at Montjuic. They may end up having to go back to Montjuic again. Now, remember, they played their only home game so far in the pre-season, the Joan Gamper Trophy, which is the pre-season trophy that they do that's dedicated to the man who founded the club, against Como at their training ground at the Mini Estadi. They can't do that for La Liga. Remember, Real Madrid played games at their training ground at Valdebebas, but that was during COVID when there weren't any spectators. So that's different. Now, the remarkable thing to me is just how small the capacity will be if they do get the send-off, and imagine this happens. The Camp Nou will only hold 27,000 for the first phase, which is less than Montjuic holds at the moment. So obviously it'll be different to Montjuic in that everyone will want to get in. They won't be able to receive all season ticket holders. I presume they won't be able to receive away fans as well. One of the big things for them is to get the corporate hospitality parts of the ground open as quickly as possible, because that's the real money spinner, of course. But it's a very unusual situation. And of course, if they don't get in there for the start of the Champions League group stages, it's highly likely they won't be moving in this calendar year, and maybe not till February, because UEFA, there is precedent, of course, for teams moving mid-Champions League season. You think Porto, when they won it in 2004, moved mid-season. Manchester United were the first visitors, where they lost those Benny McCarthy goals. You think of the opening game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where Hugo Lloris saved that penalty from Kun Aguero when they got past Manchester City. Of course, they'd played the first half of that Champions League season at Wembley when they got to the final in 2019. So there's precedent for that. But of course, the fact that the Champions League is extended now, and so it goes till the end of January, means it would have to be a little longer. Now, of course, there's a possibility that they could move between the two stadiums, but that does seem like a little bit of a logistical fiddle. And maybe this gives them a little bit of room, though it's believed they lost up to 100 million not by having games at Camp Nou last season. They've really struggled to fill Montjuic, and of course they have to pay to rent it as well. But looking good on the pitch for them anyway. They did come back from 2-0 down at Levante this weekend to win 3-2.
Yeah, and we should say later on in this section, I'll be talking about, but you're right to mention Spurs at Wembley. Fans never happy with it. It was a horrible experience for over 2 years. Barcelona fans haven't taken to the Montjuic either. Later on, I'll tell you about some fans who really have taken to a temporary home just now. Quickly, Andy, they did win, but Marcus Rashford, making his competitive debut, I think, was hooked at half-time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was a bad first half for Barcelona, and Levante were brilliant in that first half. Like we were saying earlier, they complained a lot about the penalty decision that made it 2-0. It was a very modern handball penalty, but I don't know. I don't think it was outrageous by any means. Put away by 38-year-old Jose Luis Morales, El Comandante, who's back at Levante doing great things. He had a goal disallowed earlier in the game as well before they made it 1-0 and he made it 2-0. But Barcelona came out firing. Once Rashford went off, they made a couple of substitutions at half-time. And Gavi came on, to put a bit of bite in midfield as well. Pedri and Ferran turned it round. And then it was an own goal in the final minute by Unai El Ghazabal, which got them the win. I mean, it was one of those delicious Lamine Yamal crosses that you couldn't really blame El Ghazabal for putting it in. It was a challenge that he had to make, and it just turned out that it ended up in his own net. But obviously, Hansi Flick really pleased with them being able to come back and show real mentality. Much more difficult than their breeze at Mallorca against 9 men last week.
Less delighted, I think, with things, probably Diego Simeone. A poor start for Atletico Madrid. After 2 solid years of huge spending, as they have sought to really change the configuration and the personnel at the club from aging dogs of war into something else. But so far, Andy, the formula not quite working out.
No, it's taking time, I think it's fair to say. And, a lot of experienced players have been edged out. We talked about Saul. Koke is not a starter now. Griezmann has not started in the first 2 games. And you wonder what his season looks like, even though the way he played pre-season suggested, look, he's not taking it lying down. They took the lead early on yesterday against Elche, a man who's been linked to the Premier League a lot in the last week or so, Alexander Sorloth, with the opening goal there. But after that, they conceded a really daft goal on the break, and a sort of goal that, when you see Atletico in recent years conceding from set pieces, you think, this isn't like them. And then you realise, OK, it is like them now. I just wonder if that happens with goals on the counter-attack. And they were so open, and Rafa Mir scored on a really well-executed counter. And you look at that and you think that's a really unusual goal for them to concede. To see a Diego Simeone side overcommit, especially in the first 20 minutes of a game at home, it's really remarkable. And so how they flesh that out will be really interesting to see. By the way, 3-0 now to Real Madrid. Vinicius Junior, who got the assist for the second goal for Kylian Mbappe, he's just stroked the third into the far corner. 3-0 for Real Madrid, heading for 3 points. Still not conceded a goal yet in the opening 2 games in La Liga, unlike their city rivals. We've spoken in recent times how Real Madrid have almost become more like Atletico than Atletico. Nothing says Atletico like 2 clean sheets, does it? Something that Atletico, having dominated those opening 2 games and got 1 point out of them, don't seem capable of doing at the moment. I wonder if one of the players they're missing is Rodrigo de Paul, who of course went off to Inter Miami to join his mate Messi. Well,
it's very interesting. You mentioned the sort of Argentinian contingent there at Atletico, to finish off about them, because their marquee player these days is Julian Alvarez. Of course it is. World Cup year where Argentina will be hoping to retain their trophy. Very odd so early in the season for not him now, it's not his quote, but quotes from people close to him that he is, quote, unhappy in Madrid.
Well, it's not that he's unhappy. It's they're unhappy that he's gone to Atletico, if that makes sense. That his entourage think maybe he should have either stayed at Manchester City or gone to a more glamorous club. I suppose, than Atletico. Now, look, Atletico really belong in the European elite now. Whatever you think of the style of football, or whatever you think of Diego Simeone, obviously that style of football has evolved a bit in recent years. But it's interesting how maybe his people think he should have gone for something a bit more mediatastic. I tend to think, as with all Argentinians, it's all about the World Cup. So the fact that he's ended up being paired with Almeida, Thiago
been a real
Almada,
star for Argentina this last 12 months, yeah.
I think that is going to do Argentina the world of good, especially considering, they might start the World Cup next year without Messi. We'll have to see. Of course, he'll be in the squad, but he might not start the games, or he might not start all of the games. I think that's something that's going to stand both of those players in really good stead. And of course, he can be the main guy at Atleti, especially with the marginalisation of Griezmann.
Very quickly, Andy, Girona. We're always looking for clubs who are setting off, even this early in the season, the distress flares. I suggest Girona are those.
Yeah, I mean, they did it today at Villarreal with our pal Paulo Gazzaniga, although really he was the Frank Spencer of the opening weekend of La Liga. He made two massive errors and then got himself sent off against Rayo Vallecano in their home defeat in the opening game.
But still very, very handsome, though. Still very handsome.
He is. There's no doubt about it. And he was very, very handsome in front of his TV today as they lost 5-0. They're 4-0 down at half-time. They were just atrocious. And I think you look at a couple of things there. You look at the fact that they've lost a lot of good players in the last year and a half. But also, on top of that, you look at the connection with Manchester City and wonder what happens next. Because Victor Reis, who of course came in with Kuzanov at the same time from Brazil, he was starting. And if it's a season where they're going to be struggling against relegation, I can't imagine City are going to be super happy with that. Someone who they've got high hopes for the future for. So do they intervene? Do they lend their sister club a couple of players?
Send them Rodri, yeah.
On the moment, at talent alone, I think they look in proper trouble there.
Okay, Andy, thank you for that. My star of the week in Spain are the fans of Real Betis. They beat... who did they beat, Andy? I can't read my own handwriting there.
Alaves.
They beat Alaves 1-0, goal by Giovanni Lo Celso, speaking of Argentinians. But Real Betis have moved out of their infamous and beautiful Heliopolis Stadium for 2 years for it to get refurbished. This was their first game at the old Olympic Stadium in Seville. And the crowd last night, not like moaning Barcelona fans, was 55,000, making a fabulous racket. So well done. Stars of the week for me are the Real Betis fans. Who are your star, Andy?
Well, it being La Liga, I like to go for an unfashionable big number 9. Unfortunately, Vedat Muriqi is suspended this week, so I've had to go for Ante Budimir, the latest of late developers, who's been brilliant over the last couple of years for Osasuna. He got his first goal of the season today, a header, obviously, at the near post to beat Valencia. 34 years old and still really looking the part for them. By the way, it's finished Oviedo 0, Real Madrid 3.
And by the way, they've done the 17th hole, and Tommy Fleetwood, Britain's own, England's own Tommy Fleetwood, makes his way down the last fairway, or towards the tee for the 18th in the FedEx Cup. He is 3 shots ahead of Patrick Cantlay. So unless something absolutely mad happens, he's going to finally win one of these big tournaments in the United States. Coming up next here on Trans Europe Express, we're going to talk about Italy.
over the last few years, Formula One has gone from elitist and insular to a global entertainment brand. The transformation's down to American investment group Liberty Media, who cultivated a new image for the sport since buying it in 2016. Better access to drivers, improved content on social media and tapping into the US market have given F1 a massive boost in both attention and revenues. But is everyone happy?
Yeah, now listen, time is running out to enter our VIP competition as the NFL returns to Wembley in October. The Los Angeles Rams take on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we're giving you the chance to win 6 seats in a private box with full hospitality plus $5,000 spending money. But it all ends tomorrow, so be quick. Here's how to enter.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, text the word cash to 83338 and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or enter for free by calling 0330 880 3338. All entries must be received by 25th August at 11 p.m. This is a talkSPORT limited promotion run on talkSPORT, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. See talksport.com for terms and conditions.
Okay, let's look now at things that have been going on in Italy, Andy. Our headline here, rather deliciously, is Double Big Mac, because Scott McTominay continues to establish himself not only as a Ballon d'Or contender, but as a superstar in Italian football in a 2-0 win for Napoli against Sassuolo.
Yeah, that's right. And it's been a tough old week, really, for Napoli. They looked as if they got their whole transfer window sorted. And then there was the injury to Romelu Lukaku that turned out to be a little bit worse than it initially appeared in pre-season. So it looks like he's going to be out for 3 to 4 months. There was even discussion during the week that Lukaku might be deregistered for the first bit of the season from the Serie A list and the Champions League list. Of course, this is influencing their current pursuit of Rasmus Højlund, who they're talking to. And I don't know, if I was Rasmus Højlund, what would persuade me more than a phone call from the big man? From Scott McTominay himself to say, get yourself over here. We're having a super time. And of course, worrying about where the goals might come from, we needn't have worried, because McTominay scored the first goal to get them on the road to the title in the final game of last season. And he scored the first Napoli goal of this season, the first official goal of this season, front post header to get them in front of Sassuolo yesterday, hit the crossbar as well just before half time. Then Kevin De Bruyne got one. You might see from a distance Kevin De Bruyne free kick, and it sounds magnificent. Okay, he was just trying to really pick out one of his teammates, and it went through all of them and went straight in, but no one's complaining. A win at a team that won Serie B at Canter last season, mainly because they kept many of their good players from when they went down. So a first hurdle cleared for Napoli while they wait for that big striker to replace Lukaku for the moment. But when you got Super Mac, who cares?
Yeah, time talking once again about the shirts, the new shirt season. They played Napoli in a kind of mushroom soup-coloured affair, which made Kevin De Bruyne...
Mushroom soup?
Yes. It made Kevin De Bruyne look even more pale than usual. So he's almost translucent now, Kevin. Have a look at it, Andy. Look at a picture of Kevin De Bruyne in that shirt. You can't.
I'm just checking my notes. It says we asked for champagne. And we got mushroom soup.
Well, it looks like mushroom soup to me. Champagne's transparent. It doesn't really have a colour, does it? Not really.
But funnily enough, because Kevin De Bruyne is quite a sweaty exerciser, the shirt looked transparent on him after about 75 minutes. So
yeah, let me just tell you that in the golf, Tommy Fleetwood is making his way down the fairway on the 18th. And it's really interesting to watch because among the people waiting at the 18th green are his putative Ryder Cup teammates. I can see Justin Rose. I can see Shane Lowry waiting to greet Tommy Fleetwood should he turn this advantageous position he's in into an actual victory on the American Tour after all these years. His approach shot has landed in not the best place, but at least it hasn't gone into the bunker as he heads for the enormous 18th green there at the FedEx. Patrick Cantlay is the only person who can probably catch him, but it will require Fleetwood to do something absolutely maniacal at this stage. Now, we've talked about Scott McTominay and De Bruyne and Lukaku and Højlund, another ex-Premier League player who's making his way in Italy after a tremendous pre-season for AS Roma. Evan Ferguson, also very, very good in this opening round of fixtures, Andy.
Yeah, and bearing in mind that he's competing for a place with Artem Dovbyk, the Ukrainian, who they brought over after a bit of a race for his signature from Girona last summer. And he did okay in his first season, I would say, even though they went through 3 coaches and played in quite different ways, scored 17 goals in all competitions.
I think that's pretty good.
It's clear that Dovbyk, though, is now expendable, Danny, because Evan Ferguson's come in. They will replace Dovbyk if he leaves, and they might need to ship him for financial reasons. But clearly, Gasperini believes a lot in Evan Ferguson already. He started him. He led the line brilliantly, really, really well. Created for others as well. His all-round game was excellent. And when you bear in mind what the second half of the season at West Ham must have done for his confidence, he can't have done a great deal.
No.
I think to arrive in Roma and have everyone say, you're the guy, I think immediately helps. It's a really good thing for the Republic of Ireland as well as for Roma. Now, as one of the other new signings, Vesely, the Brazilian right back who scored the winner, but Ferguson fully implicated, very successful debut, and the Olympico loves him already.
You mentioned the Republic of Ireland, Andy. Let me just say that if Evan Ferguson get his form together, Troy Parrott, of course, is just tearing up trees in the Netherlands, and I wonder how long he can stay in a sort of mid-table team in Holland if he continues to score goals at the rate he is. But they definitely need the Republic of Ireland, both of those, on full swing if they have any chance in the upcoming World Cup qualifiers. Now, so again, speaking of strikers, Milan need 2. And apparently one of them, they knew about Victor Boniface's injury records before they went to the whole business of agreeing a deal for him, giving him a medical and then saying, oh, you're injured, aren't you, a lot of the time. Very strange. So where do they go from? I mean, first of all, bad luck for Victor Boniface. But where are they going to turn for 2 strikers they need?
Well, that's a really good question, Danny. I mean, it's ridiculous, really. I mean, Leverkusen signed Boniface knowing that he'd had those 2 injuries at Bodo Glimt, signed him anyway, as our good friend Kevin Hatchard has pointed out. They thought all their Christmases had come true, Leverkusen, when Al Nassr offered for him. They ended up buying John Duran instead, which I think was a great disappointment to Leverkusen and to Boniface in himself. But this Milan thing, I just don't understand. I mean, they said that he didn't fail the medical. They didn't find out anything that they didn't know already. So they've really wasted a couple of days of their time, of Leverkusen's time. And I think the main thing is their time, though, because as you say, they need a couple of forwards, they feel. Now, one of them might turn out to be Conrad Harder, who looked like he was going to be the replacement at Sporting for Victor Gyökeres when he went. Gyökeres has gone, but it feels like Harder's not first choice. They bought Luis Suarez from Almeria instead, and if they can get what they think is about 27 million euros for Harder, then they'll probably sell him. So let's see if that deal materialises. There needs to be one more, and there's just a little bit more urgency because they lost at home to Cremonese. And that's remarkable because A, Cremonese, a promoted side, B, it was the first game of the season, and C, Cremonese, Gianluca Vialli's home team, of course, the late great Gianluca Vialli, they've never won away at Milan before, which is just remarkable, really, that was able to happen. Now, of course, Milan do have a couple of other big misses. That they have Tijani Reinders, of course, who was their best player, who went to Manchester City in the summer. Theo Hernandez, who was rather less good last season, but nevertheless still a big name, has gone. Rafael Leao got injured in the Coppa Italia, which normally they wouldn't even be playing at this stage, last week as well. So we'll see how long he's out for. So they're really struggling at the moment. But I think we have to have a little word as well for Cremonese and Federico Baschirotto, who scored the opening goal. Brilliant sort of centre-back's header. He is the muscliest footballer that I've seen in a very, very long time. And yes, he did do the bicep curl to celebrate.
Listen, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me tell you that at the FedEx Cup, Tommy Fleetwood is now within about 15 feet of the flag on the 18th. The crowd have rushed from around the clubhouse and on the fairway to make sure they see this. Well, it's a historic moment because Fleetwood, as I say, is the player who has earned the most money, I think, on the American circuit without ever winning a big tournament or any tournament, in fact. And he's about to do that in the next few minutes' time. Who's your star of the week, Andy, in Italy?
I've gone for your pal, Nico Paz, who scored his first goal of the season. Really bad start to Sarri's second spell in charge of Lazio. Of course, he's already been touched by a transfer ban. They went down 2-0 at Como today. Nico Paz scored an absolutely brilliant free kick from outside the penalty box. Doing great there in the number 10 shirt.
Nico Paz is a young player, of course. I'm going to go for a veteran. Domenico Berardi. When, as Andy mentioned, Sassuolo went down played in the second tier last season, he stayed with the club. And although they lost on their return, as we've just been hearing, to Serie A, Berardi, who, is a one-club man so far, has signed a new contract that will keep him there till 2029. He'll be 35. So Domenico has decided he's going to be a Sassuolo lifer. And we tip our hat in his general direction for that. You're listening to Trans Europe Express. Next up, Andy's going to try and unravel some of the big transfer stories. I've now got a week to get sorted out. You know what? Tommy Fleetwood has done it. There on the 18th hole in the FedEx Cup. I say the season-ending big tournament in the United States. All eyes now turning to the Ryder Cup. And his first PGA Tour win in 164 starts. Now, man, he's been close so many times, including very, very recently when he blew a lead in the last 2 or 3 holes. But today, he kept his nerve against the charge of Patrick Cantlay and the brilliant 62 that the Canadian Corey Connors put together. He put in the last putt from about a foot. The look of relief was palpable. He took off his hat to salute the crowd, once again unveiling those luxurious locks. But watching the other the Europeans who made the cut, who are still there today, racing onto the green to bump chest with him, and clearly very, very delighted for him. But it's a huge moment for Tommy Fleetwood, and who knows, that may be the victory that actually finally catapults him into what he already is, kind of a contender for the majors. Certainly can't do his confidence in the upcoming Ryder Cup any harm either. Victory in America for Tommy Fleetwood there in the FedEx Cup. Now, Andy, the transfer window, as you were hearing there, slams shut, as local bylaws insist, I must say, in 7.5 days' time. So much still to be done for so many clubs, not least Juventus, who still haven't got the deal for Kolo Muani done, and who, despite his goal this evening in the 2-0 victory that Juventus had, they're looking to move Dusan Vlahovic after a not very successful spell at the club off the books. They've really got some work to do in this next 7 days, Juventus.
Yeah, big time. They have. And I think before we put Rabio in the picture, I mean, that's a bit mischievous, but I think it has to be done. We know Milan are interested in him. We know Napoli are interested in him. I still think they might find a way to smooth it out at Marseille. Marseille need to, I think, climb down and be reasonable here because he's such a good player for them and so important for them, as we were saying earlier. But Vlahovic is an interesting one because it's kind of, I suppose, a legacy contract, that he was signed in a different era of Juventus. He earns 12 million a year, which no one else is going to pay him, which he would be within his rights. Well, obviously he'd be within his rights, but I think it would be understandable if he just let his contract run down and took his pick next summer. He could be one of those strikers that Milan take. Of course, we know he's got a good relationship with Max Allegri. So the question is, how much of a pay cut would he be prepared to take in the long term, and how much would Juventus pay to make him go away? Because I suspect if they were to get, say, 20 million for him, or maybe a little less, they would spend a substantial chunk of it on basically paying Vlahovic to go away, which I think is a shame because we saw from the goal tonight and we see intermittently there's an enormous amount of ability there. I can think of a few Premier League teams who he would improve at his best as well. But you're looking at someone who's in his mid-20s and really has been written off. He's sort of run aground.
This is a hugely important moment for him. His career once so promised. If he doesn't make the right move now, whether that is to stay at Juventus and fight, or whether to go somewhere where he can be perhaps a starter or back up to a star player and rebuild his reputation. I mean, his agents will go around telling you he's still a top player. The football community, the football coaches won't be fooled by that. He's a potentially top player who hasn't been a top player for 2 or 3 years. The reasons, we don't know, but we'll have to see how that one goes. Now, Andy, you won't enjoy this because I'm going to start selling Lyon's players, but Malik Fofana is a real outstanding young player. Can they hang on to him for another 7.5 days?
I think it's tough because you're looking at someone who has interest. Anyone who's seen him knows how special he is. He's had offers already this summer from Nottingham Forest, from Everton. I think the price is fairly gettable. I think Lyon are doing business around about sort of 40 million euro mark, so about 32, 33 million pounds, which would be well worth it. The ceiling's very high. He's very influential already. He's composed. He's scoring more goals than when he initially arrived. So he's a creator as well as a scorer, very, very fast. And he could be a huge player for Belgium's future. What is sort of holding it up is the fact that he wants to play for a Champions League club. And he should. He's good enough, even now at 20, and even with a fair way to go in terms of his progression. But it was quite funny. He did one of these just anodyne posts about 1 more goal, 3 more points, thanks to the fans sort of thing on Instagram yesterday. And all the comments were from his teammates going, could you please stay? Moussa Niakate saying to Corentin Tolisso, I'm kidnapping him tomorrow and I'm only letting him out for the Marseille game next Sunday.
Very, very good.
So it's clear that there's a big sporting interest in keeping him. But whether Lyon can sell elsewhere so they don't need to sell him, that might be interesting.
Andy, I do want to talk about Magnus Kliush in just a second. But first, we need to talk about the goalkeeping situation surrounding Donnarumma, where not arguably, but definitely he was the best goalkeeper in the latter stages of the Champions League last season. Now, apparently completely unsellable, making a rather low-key departure from Paris Saint-Germain at the weekend. What's going to happen to him? And if it really is Manchester City, then the knock-on for Ederson and James Trafford is enormous.
Yes, it is. And going back to Donnarumma himself, I think the player power at Marseille and Paris Saint-Germain this weekend is extraordinary. Because if you think the club at Marseille is resolved to throw out Adrien Rabiot, and there's some pushback of that from the players, I think really the club at PSG wanted Donnarumma to leave through the back door, and the players really insisted he was given a send-off. This is before he's agreed a move anywhere else, by the way, and before a move has been sealed anywhere else. On Friday night against Angers, he came out in his civvies and waved to the crowd, and Marquinhos was pushing him towards the fans, and all the players.
Well, what he did in the quarter, semi-final and final of the Champions League, he deserves that kind of send-off, I think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But it's so strange seeing it happen before the move's actually been sealed, I guess. Anyway, the latest reports that we have are that Manchester City and Donnarumma have agreed terms. Now, this is all dependent on what happens with Ederson. Now, I think you're looking at where Galatasaray are. Obviously, there's not such a rush for them as there is for Manchester City, because the Turkish transfer window, and this is something we have to bear in mind when we talk about this in the coming weeks, doesn't close until the 12th of September. So they've got a bit of time. And, of course, they've got the possibility to mop up a couple of players that get stuck. I wonder, actually, if he hadn't have got injured, if Marc-Andre ter Stegen could have been this year's Victor Osimhen, and he might have ended up going to Galatasaray when there was no one else taking him, and he was faced with the prospect of not playing at all in a World Cup year. And what happens to ter Stegen in January will still be very interesting. But if Ederson to Galatasaray gets done, which seems doable, they're not a million miles apart in terms of a fee, and Ederson seems interested at the very least by the idea. I'm not sure that's a great move for Manchester City, even bearing in mind the poor season that Ederson had by his standards last time out. But with a year left on his contract, if they want to sell him for some money, this is the moment, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, Ederson was, with his ability to play out like an outfield player, was instrumental in transforming the way Manchester City and latterly English football play. Donnarumma, for all his brilliant array of goal line skills, is not that kind of footballer. And Trafford is England's best young goalkeeper. And if he ends up being on the bench at Manchester City for the next 5 years, no one will come along to challenge Jordan Pickford. Talk to me about Aliouche then. Where is he, Andy? Monaco.
Monaco.
It seems that he is gettable as well, and some pretty big clubs, including the current champions of Europe and the current Europa League holders, are watching him very closely.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is here with Kliush. Paris Saint-Germain have been convinced about his ability for a very long time, and they're right to be convinced. Until they create some space in the squad, he won't go anywhere. And Monaco are asking for top dollar for him. They're asking for 70 million euros. And when you look at his ceiling, I can understand that. Now, there are two things that might hold this up, apart from the possibility that PSG can't shift someone in this last week, and maybe you're thinking of a Kang In Lee, for example, or Carlos Soler, who's still on the books there. Maybe both. I think the issue is what's happening elsewhere at Monaco. Now, we talked earlier when we were talking about Monaco's defeat at Lille earlier that these two teams could look very different next week. Now, Lille will hope to get a few people over the line in the last week. Monaco are hoping to shift a few and then get a few. So for them, the prime sale is going to be Elis Ben Seguir. who is probably going to end up at Bayer Leverkusen, who is Akliouch's wing twin on the other side, right foot coming in as opposed to Akliouch's left foot coming in. Akliouche, despite all the speculation, has been able to get on with it and play very well in the opening stages of this season. If Ben Seguir goes, and if Wilfried Singo, the central defender, goes / right back goes, Galatasaray interested in him, just as they're interested in Manuel Akanji, a lot of other players. If those two go, they're going to earn probably the thick end of 70 million, which covers what you would get for Akliouche, really. So they're not going to sell him for anything less than exactly what they want to sell him for. Monaco need money, but they're going to get money off other players first. So I think that makes an Akliouche departure possible, but not really likely.
Yeah, you're paying a great deal there for a player who is super talented, but I know potential is what people want to pay for, but 70 million starts to look pretty spicy, when you see some of the other players who are available. Thank you very much indeed for that, Andy, and thank you for listening to Trans Europe Express. Still an hour to go. Of course, Tim Vickery will join us, and much else besides. I will be looking forward to the final qualifiers for the Champions League. All that stuff coming in just a few seconds' time here on Trans Europe Express.
Really? We've scoured the planet to find out. Forget a cold, wet Tuesday night in Stoke. Try playing in a blizzard 220 miles inside the Arctic Circle at the world's northernmost professional club. When Chelsea lost at Tromsø in Norway in the 97-98 Cup Winners' Cup, a massive snowstorm hit at half-time. These two boys and their brooms were absolutely no match for it. We're staying in Scandinavia for Scotland's toughest away day on a windswept cliff in the Faroe Islands. In Euro 2000 qualifying, Craig Brown's men were taken to fishing village Toftir. Kevin Gallagher called the pitch a cowfield and the wind like Pittodrie on a bad day. The Faroe Islands part-timers equalised in stoppage time, leading to these absolute scenes, and still one of Scotland's most embarrassing results.
Daft little ground, silly game.
But away trips don't come any tougher than a lung-busting schlep up the Andes to face Bolivia in La Paz. But now the Bolivians have taken home advantage to another level. The country's highest city, El Alto, 4,100 metres above sea level. Grass doesn't even grow up here. Bolivia have not lost here yet. The longest unbeaten run in any professional league ever belongs to Red Star Belgrade, or Crvena Zvezda if you must. They've gone 7 years without defeat at the Rajko Mitic in Serbia's Superliga. Their fans are pretty intimidating as well, but they're not as loud as this mob. Galatasaray's Ali Sami Yen Stadium's officially the loudest in world football. In a derby with Fenerbahce, Galatasaray fans set a Guinness World Record of 131 decibels. That's louder than Motorhead, and pretty tough to carry out your manager's instructions when you can't even hear them. However, our most intimidating away day is in Wales, where cameras can't enter and players can't leave. HMP Prescoed. This prison team was briefly kicked out the Gwent League over concerns about young opposition having to go in there. Now that's a tough place to go.
Early June 1939, Germany, always a tough place to go to.
Welcome back, everybody, to the third and final hour of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly. Accompanying with me on the journey and leading me on the journey, I'm delighted to say, as so often, Andy Brassell. We've got a lot to get through in this final hour. Let me tell you that we'll be talking in a few minutes' time to Brian Chiaretta over in the United States about the latest announcements, about the trappings that will surround the World Cup draw in the United States. That's in December. The European nations, of course, haven't even started their qualifiers yet. We'll also be talking about the Champions League qualifiers coming up this week, in which, we could see, obviously Club Brugge against Rangers is huge. Bodø Glimt may qualify for their first ever group stage, and Fenerbahce against Benfica, which takes place in Lisbon, is absolutely finely poised. Lots of that to go as well. Andy will take you around the leagues. But first, though, as always this time of night on Trans Europe Express, it is my pleasure to join all the way across there in Brazil with our South American and world football czar. It's Tim Vickery. Hi, Tim.
How you doing, gentlemen? How you doing?
Really good. And always great to hear from you as always. Now, the two South American sort of transcontinental competitions have reached the quarter-final stage. Let's start with the big one, the Libertadores. Who has made that last 8?
Yeah, we got 4 from Argentina, so that's a good hand from Argentina. 3
better
from
than
Brazil.
Some people predicted, I think, Tim. Is that fair?
Possibly, but they haven't been up against much. The moment of truth now arrives. So 4 from Argentina, 3 from Brazil, and 1 from Ecuador. It was a pretty tough watch. My God, there was some dross. And a lot of these teams have qualified have done very, very little to do so. There were maybe 2 who qualified with certain distinction, both Brazilians, and Flamengo, away to compatriots Internacional, 1-0 up from the first leg. They won 2-0, and they were Internacional couldn't lay a glove on them. And the key to it all, the central midfield duo, well known, so you find people, Jorginho and Saul. They just dictated the tone of the game, and they took Internacional apart. So I think Flamengo are the favourites. Palmeiras, they won their first leg 4-0 away to Universitario of Peru. So that puts that one nicely to bed. Apart from that, and River Plate, a lot of money there, River Plate of Argentina. They needed a nervy penalty shootout to get past Libertad of Paraguay. Estudiantes of Argentina, there's a little bit of money behind them. They beat another Paraguayan team, Cerro Porteño, 1-0 on aggregate, which was a very, very iffy penalty in stoppage time of the first leg, and two really, really difficult games to watch they were. Racing of Argentina got past Peñarol 3-2 with a last-minute goal when they were down to 10 men. It was more dramatic than quality. Vélez Sarsfield beat Brazilian opposition 2-0. They beat Fortaleza, but Fortaleza are having a terrible time. They're down in the relegation zone. They've just sacked their coach. And that leaves the Ecuadorians, who are the only representatives of the north of the continent. Liga of Quito, or LDU, they do have that advantage of altitude. And poor old David Ancelotti, son of Carlo, just taken over as coach of Botafogo, who's never seen anything like that in his life. It's a tough ask there after a month of being a coach to go up to altitude. They're only protecting a 1-0 lead and they crashed out 2-0. So no 2 titles in a row for Botafogo. When battle is joined for the quarterfinals, which will be after the FIFA date, so kind of mid-September, it does then take on a little bit Brazil against Argentina, because it's Flamengo against Estudiantes. The tied around, no doubt about it, is Palmeiras against River Plate. LDU of Ecuador against Sao Paulo, who after 2 turgid games, they played poorly in both. They beat Atletico Nacional of Colombia on penalties, and there's the guarantee of one Argentine semi-finalist with the tie between Racing and Vélez. But based on what we've seen over the past 2 weeks, Flamengo and Palmeiras are streets ahead of the field.
Tim, we'll wait for next week for you to report on David Ancelotti's sacking. But in the meantime, I wanted to talk about one of the other coaches in Brazil who we end up talking about a lot, Abel at Palmeiras. Now, big week for him. Not only have they got through to the quarterfinals where they're going to face River Plate, as you said, but he turned down an approach from Saudi this week, which, considering what we were talking about before, that there's a sense in some areas in Brazilian football that maybe Abel's stayed a little bit too long at Palmeiras. What does this mean? Does this mean that he's just not going to Saudi, that he might be open to another move? And what would it mean to get yet another Copa Libertadores title for him? Where would that leave his legacy? As the greatest coach that Palmeiras have ever had in their history. Why duck out before you've done that? They've got quite an expensively assembled squad. Why not? You know, they're how many games? They're 2 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, and a final. They're 5 games away from that. Why would you want to duck out now? And especially to Saudi. I think he's aiming a little bit higher. I think he's aiming at a top European club, and I would think he's probably entitled to it after what he's done here. And the reverence that he gets from the players is really touching. And what they'll say about him is he always has a plan. And I've seen him change games mid-game with a man sent off, and I've seen him do it again and again. There are disciplinary problems with him. He gets himself sent off a lot. He's out of control on the touchline. He's quite unpleasant on the touchline, but he's obviously a class act. And I would be surprised if Saudi is the limit of his ambitions.
Tim, in the equivalent of the Europa League, I don't want to dismiss it by saying that, but in the second trans-South American tournament, the Sudamerica, a much more diverse group of clubs have made the last stages, which makes it very interesting.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and that's really what it's there for, I think. We got one team from Colombia, Once Caldas. Dairo Moreno, 40 years old, won the Libertadores with them back in 2004, still going strong, still scoring goals, and he's got them there. Independiente del Valle from Ecuador, who produced Moses Caicedo and so many others. They just got through on penalties after a last-minute goal. Fluminense of Brazil, Atletico Mineiro of Brazil, 2 heavyweights there. Bolívar of Bolivia. Don't write them off. They got an informal time with a City group. There's money behind them, and there is the extreme altitude of La Paz. Lanús of Argentina, and Alianza Lima of Peru. And Alianza Lima could get a bye into the semis. Why? Because one place is still up for grabs. Because the game between Independiente of Argentina and Universidad de Chile, of Chile, obviously enough, although Santiago Wanderers in Chile are not from Santiago, so you should never take names at face value. The game between Independiente and Laú, was cancelled. It won't happen. It was cancelled 2 minutes into the second half after some of the worst violence in a football stadium I've seen for a long, long time. Now, what happens here, and maybe part of this story, is that Argentine football and the stadium at Independiente, it's not really used to having away fans. You've got to have them for the international matches. And a dreadful, dreadful error was made because the visiting fans, lots of them from Chile, they were placed in the higher. There's two levels of this stadium. Tight, compact, just over 40,000 capacity stadium. There's two levels. And they were placed in the higher level. Now, if you're going to do that, the space in front on the lower level either has to be extremely well protected or, advisedly, not sold at all. So you've got a dead area. But Independiente didn't do that. Independiente sold all those places directly below the Chilean fans. And the Chilean fans appeared to enjoy themselves hugely by absolutely smashing up the place, including going into the toilet facilities, smashing them up, getting the toilet vases out and throwing them onto the fans down below. And how we didn't have mass casualties here, I really don't know. So obviously this provokes an extreme commotion. And the referee, it all gets worse during half-time because no one's got anything else to do. And 2 minutes into the second half, the referee stops it, takes the players off the field. And the announcement comes, the game will only go ahead when the visiting supporters leave the stadium. So lots of them do, and then they walk out into an ambush. Because that's where the police presence is. It hasn't been in the stadium. There's 6,500 police. But they're outside the stadium. There's home fans as well, waiting for some vengeance. So there's another bloodbath then outside the stadium. Around 30 of the Chilean fans stay put. They won't leave the stadium. So the home fans then from Independiente managed to get up and invade the space. And then there's a real battle going on with those 30, one of whom decides that his best course of action is to jump down. Now, he's in hospital seriously ill. So this was just so wrong on multiple levels. And CONMEBOL have cancelled the game, so it won't take place. They will take disciplinary action. And I think the only thing they can really do is kick both of the teams out. The visiting Chileans are obviously responsible for their own fan behaviour, but the home side Independiente are responsible especially for the way that they sold the tickets, which made something like this possible. So it really was absolutely sickening, the scenes you're watching, and it's yet another reminder, as if any were needed, that just putting over 40,000 people in a reduced space is very, very much a threat to the safety of those in there.
In better news in Argentinian football, Tim, tell us about Angel Di Maria. He's properly home with his feet under the table now, right?
He certainly is, yeah. It's gone well from day one, but it won't go any better than this. It's the Rosario derby. Rosario Central and the splendid name Newell's Old Boys. And the city of Rosario, it's one of those cities that it's big enough for two clubs but not big enough for three, really. So these two clubs, and it's one of the most contested, if not the most contested derby in Argentine football. The Lepers against the Scoundrels, as it's known, because one of the teams way back in the day agreed to hold a friendly with proceeds going to a local leper hospital where Che Guevara worked before he became Che. They were
wow.
Yes, they were Newell's Old Boys, and Rosario Central refused to go along with it. So ever since then, Newell's have been the Lepers and Rosario have been the Scoundrels, and it's very, very fierce. It finished 1-0. The goal came inside the last 20 minutes, and it was a free kick from about 30 that Di Maria took, and it was almost as if he just picked it up and put it in the top corner. It was just a magnificently struck free kick.
It's all over the internet, Tim. It's a fantastic goal.
And so it should be. And I wonder, because I think Di Maria, and I've followed him since 2006, 2007, I think he's a one-off. I've never seen, I wonder if you can come up with anyone, a genuinely, because he really is, genuinely world class with such little ego. The pair don't usually go together, and no. I still don't think his real contribution to so many of the teams that he's played for, and especially the Argentine national team, I don't think it's been really appreciated. Now, he's retired from international football, and it's a bit like rock and roll, Danny. They just don't know what's going to replace him. Garnacho was going to be the man, but you just can't, where is it? Where is he at the moment? And he just gave them the versatility and that one-against-one magic. And I think he won certainly the first hour of the World Cup final against France.
Yes.
They unleashed him on the side that no one was expecting, and he ran Koundé ragged. I wonder if there's going to be pressure for him to come on back and have one last tilt, because it's hard to see at the moment who they've got who can do anything similar to Di Maria, who for me, he really is one of the greats in his own quiet, understated way. We have been in the presence of genius.
And because he's quiet and understated, he's never really recognised for, as you say, Tim, how good he is. And that's remarkable when you consider he's not just been a brilliant player in Europe for the best part of 20 years for a number of the best clubs in Europe. He's a serial winner of big matches, as in the player who wins the matches for you.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, they will try and persuade him, because imagine, Argentina are struggling perhaps in the last third of a game. The thought of Angel Di Maria coming on, even at his age, half an hour of football's been no problem to him. And he brings such an array of personal and team skills to the table. I can very well see him being asked to turn up, because Argentinians take the World Cup so very, very seriously, and quite rightly so. Tim, fantastic. Thank you very, very much indeed.
My pleasure. Speak same time, same place next week.
You're absolutely right about that. So several thousand kilometres further north in North America, next we'll be talking to Brian Sciaretta as the arrangements for the World Cup draw coming up in the United States in December, that's the draw, not the tournament, of course, have started to take shape. Central to all of those appears to be the figure of Donald Trump. We'll talk about that next here on Trans-Europe Express. Okay, as most of you will probably know, the World Cup is now less than a year away in the United States and Mexico and Canada. And this week we started to get some idea about how the draw will be made. It's in early December. It'll be in the United States. And once again, that top comedy pairing of Gianni Infantino and Donald Trump were together for the announcement of the arrangements, some of which I'll tell you about in just a second. To review how this is all going to work out in the United States and the reaction to it, if any, I'm delighted to say we're joined by top American journalist and football fan, Brian Chiaretta. Hi, Brian.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's our pleasure, actually. We need your input. So it looks like the draw is going to take place at the Kennedy Arts Center, and not, as I misunderstood earlier in the day, at the Kennedy Space Center, which would have been something. It also looks like the President of the United States wants to be involved in the big event.
Oh, of course. That's unsurprising. I think he likes the spotlight, and he has a long history with sports, dating back to like the 1980s when he tried to start his own American Football League and everything, and he's always loved boxing. So, a big event. He's going to want to be front and center of it and be seen with Infantino and everything, and then obviously having it at the Kennedy Center where he picks the board members there at this art center. So, I think it all kind of fits and makes sense.
And Brian,
I guess the question really, Brian, is this a Trump thing or is it a FIFA thing? Because if we go back and look at Infantino's other relationships with political leaders, which kind of seems directly in contravention with the rules of FIFA, actually. You look at Vladimir Putin at the 2018 World Cup, you look at the Qatari regime at the 2022 World Cup. Do you think people are right to focus this all on Trump, or is this more of a FIFA thing?
I mean, I think, there is plausible deniability in terms of, like, is this overly political? Because, a World Cup, there's always, even going to the Olympics too, there's always a lot of, political figures want to be seen, as long as they're not involved with the governance of like the event itself. But there's going to need to obviously be some cooperation with the political hierarchy, right? In terms of law enforcement, immigration, visa statuses, just overall transportation. You can't escape having political figures involved in this thing too. Now, whether or not it's at the Kennedy Center, does it make sense? Yeah, it's in the backyard of the White House and every political leader on the national scale in the United States. But that being said, it's a great venue. I've been there. I used to live in Washington, D.C. It's a magnificent place. And it's not like it's being held at his house or something at the White House.
No.
No. It's in a great event hall too. So, I kind of see that way as well.
And Brian, I was interested. Part of me wants to be appalled. Gianni Infantino, I mean, I might as well come clean here, for whom I've got no time at all. He, in this little dual thing they were doing, this little double act, he referred to the games in the Soccer World Cup as a series of Super Bowls. I mean, Americans aren't daft. They don't need to be told that these are important sports events and make comparison with what is, one of my favourite things in the year, the Super Bowl. But it's interesting that he feels almost the need to Americanize even the individual matches.
Yeah, I agree with it. You don't want to say something like that, too. I mean, you always want to tie things, I think, a little bit into, like, the host country. You see that in, like, the Olympics, stuff like that, too. Like, they make, like, little references. But, you want to have it stand on its own as its own sport, because this isn't the first World Cup that's the third for Mexico. It's the second for the United States. It's I mean, the U.S. has hosted many big soccer sports events, and we're not novices with the sport anymore like we were in '94. You don't need to be told this stuff. There's games here every day, so I think people will fully grasp. But if it's just a slip of the tongue, it's forgivable, I guess.
I guess the other thing is, Brian, it feels, particularly after the Club World Cup, that there is a sense in football that America is not an alien market, but the US is an untapped market, that there's still a lot of potential to go. And of course, Trump's language is money. So for him to be fully implicated in this actually makes a lot of sense, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah, look, I think it's not a bad thing to be aligned or to have some kind of cooperation with the President of the United States when the game is in the United States. It's, I mean, look, when the Olympics are here, we saw Barack Obama was lobbying front and center to get the Olympics in Chicago, and he came up short. This is shortly after he was the president. You know, but it's needed, though. You know, I think any kind of time you win like the Olympics or you win the World Cup, there is some kind of governing body, a positive relationship with the governing body. So, yeah, and you want money to be. It's going to take money to do these things. There's a reason why not many. Now it's 48 teams. How many countries are going to be able to host the World Cup with 48 teams? Only like the big countries, because it's going to take money and infrastructure and everything. So and at the head of it is going to be the president. It's just the way it is. I think anyone who kind of says that, who tries to slag on this, is kind of not an understanding of how things work.
And Brian, on a more parochial level, the United States team itself had a terrible run under Pochettino. Then it picked up a bit recently. How aware are the general soccer fans about the upcoming World Cup? I'm sure they're all perfectly aware of it. How much hope are they holding that, not the United States is going to win the thing, but they're going to, give a good account of themselves?
I mean, I think people, they're hopeful because it's mostly the same group of players as it was in 2022 that got to the knockouts, and you don't know the draw yet, too, and I think that goes a long way. And, obviously with another round of knockouts, with the 48 teams, you hope they can go further. But there's a lot of questions right now about this team. I kind of think they've been together too long. They're kind of showing the wear and tears of that. And it's an issue for Pochettino to kind of fix, because I think kind of like the team's issues are a little cultural inside of them. So, I think everyone's going to, I think the fans of the team know that there's problems. I think that the casual fans who might not follow it day in and day out of the working are probably more hopeful than the fans who are, to be honest.
Brian, we needed somebody who could give us the very latest from the United States. Thank you so much indeed. Brian Shearetta there, a great friend of the show and a constant source of information from the United States, for joining us here on Trans-Europe Express, where next Andy will be trying to unravel the spaghetti junctions of the final round of Champions League conference qualifiers.
the sport since buying it in 2016. Better access to drivers, improved content on social media and tapping into the US market have given F1 a massive boost in both attention and revenues.
Yeah, now listen, time is really running out to enter our fabulous VIP competition as the NFL returns to Wembley in October. The Los Angeles Rams take on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we're giving you the chance to win 6 seats in a private box with full hospitality plus $5,000 spending money. But it all ends tomorrow, so be quick. Here's how to enter.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, text the word cash to 83338 and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or enter for free by calling 0330 880 338. All entries must be received by 25th August at 11 p.m. This is a talkSPORT limited promotion run on talkSPORT, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. See talksport.com for terms and conditions.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Champions League qualifiers. Now, before we do, Andy, though, news this evening of a transfer between two of the clubs who will be very much hoping to be in, well, they will be in that extended Champions League, whatever they're calling it now, Chelsea and Dortmund.
Yeah, that's right. Carney Chukwuemeka, of course, on loan at Dortmund from Chelsea last season. They didn't take up the purchase option because it was felt it was a bit high, especially when he arrived injured in the first place. But he played really well in the bits where he did play, made a massive difference to Dortmund's midfield. There's been a desire to get the deal back on. Chukwuemeka has arrived in Dortmund this evening. He was seen being driven away from Dortmund Airport, and it seems a deal, a permanent deal, around the €25 million mark has been agreed. So Carney Chukwuemeka to Dortmund permanently.
And Chelsea continue to pull down massive income from players from player trading. Indeed, our own Andy Jacobs, who is a massive Chelsea fan, told me during the week when I was doing H&J with him, that in his mind, Chelsea have essentially become a player trading organisation rather than a sort of football-first organisation, that, of course, they haven't done very badly and are the current, looks at sleeve, champions of the world.
Well, of course, Danny, the arrival of Chukwuemeka in the Bundesliga could precipitate the departure of someone from the Bundesliga because, of course, we know that Chelsea have needed to shift a few before they bring in Xavi Simons from Leipzig.
Absolutely. Andy, let's move to these Champions League qualifiers then. Now, the one that's the tightrope for two huge clubs who the loser will not be in the Champions League this season is the tie between Benfica and Fenerbahce, a 0-0 draw in Turkey, so everything up for grabs still.
Yeah, it really is. And this was always the one. I think if you look at that, the ambition of these two clubs in the transfer market, how big they are within their own countries as well. It was going to be a huge boost for the team that got to the group stage of the Champions League, and really a massive failure for the club that doesn't. They both started the domestic season relatively well. They've looked as if they can score goals. So inevitably, they were paralysed by fear in the first game. And a game that I think became even tighter when Benfica went down to 10 men in the second half, and it essentially became attack versus defence at that point. Look, Benfica at home, I think, are very, very hard to back against. But then you look at the attacking players that Fenerbahce have got, and a lot of people will be thinking of John Duran, but I'm thinking of Stefan Szymanski, who's just brilliant, really, and could do a job for a lot of big clubs in a lot of big leagues. It's going to be really close. I think Benfica will just about get it over the line. But obviously, if Mourinho was able to go to Portugal, get a result at one of his own clubs and deliver Fenerbahce to the league phase of the Champions League, that would be, I think, probably his greatest victory since Roma got themselves to winning the Conference League. So I think it would be huge for modern Mourinho.
The week started in the Champions League with real high hopes for the two Glasgow clubs, but two poor results in Scotland means that Celtic have got work to do and Rangers are really up against it.
Yeah, Celtic have got a lot of work to do. And of course, whenever anything goes wrong at this stage, the board start getting it in the neck for who they haven't bought. Without knowing too much about the specifics of Celtic's board dealings, I think when you look at a lot of clubs about Europe, a lot of boards and a lot of coaches are under pressure simply because they have to wait for the big Premier League clubs to do their business first. And until then, you're stuck, really, aren't you, in a lot of cases. In terms of Rangers, well, obviously they've had a difficult start to the season. And I think you pointed out, Danny, how experienced Club Brugge are. They've got a young team at the moment, but anchored by some very experienced players.
During the week. And he was saying how he thought, the Rangers had a real good chance here. I was saying, well, I agree with you, but do not underrate Club Brugge. They've been doing this for over half a decade now, taking on teams at a very high level in Europe. And we saw it, Andy, in the game at Ibrox. That first 30 minutes, they showed, and it's occasionally it happens, British teams bewildered by teams who can genuinely play on the break. And not just that they flood the opposition half when the right time comes, but they wait even till the right player has the ball at his feet. There's no point in going if a defensive midfielder can't pass the ball. They wait till the creative players got it. Then they attack Rangers' spaces in between the defenders. Now, I admit, at the moment, it doesn't look like Rangers could defend themselves against a team made up of rabbits. But they were absolutely brilliant, Brugge, and it's going to be a real problem for Glasgow Rangers. The other thing that looks very likely to happen following a huge victory up there in the Arctic Circle is that the inevitable consequence of the progression that we have seen and reported on with almost monotonous regularity here on Trans-Europe Express, that of Bodø Glimt, looks like it will result, Andy, in them taking their place in the group stage of the Champions League, something that hasn't happened to a Norwegian team for a long, long, long time.
Yeah, 18 years. We're talking about the heyday of Rosenborg, who of course are competing in the Conference League this week. They're in the playoff against Mainz. So it would be amazing, and I think really a victory for the continuity, the way they're able to do really smart business, the fact that they've evolved so much that they're able to invite some of those big players back, like Patrick Berg and Jens Petter Hauge, and the fact that Kjetil Knutsen's not received a job attractive enough to take him away from them as well, because he enjoys, I guess, Pochettino-esque sort of position there, a position that he knows of power, he knows he'll never have anywhere else. So unless something goes disastrously wrong, having won 5-0 in the first leg, they're going to be there in the group stage. But of course, having not seen anything like this in Norwegian football, I'd love for us to talk to Lars Sivertsen about this at some point.
I think next week would be appropriate if we can get hold of him. Because it's a huge leap forward for Norwegian football. After, as you say, there was that golden period with Rosenborg. Yeah,
it is and it isn't, Danny, because I think we're looking at the first time that a Norwegian club gets in the expanded version of the Champions League. It's an unbelievable amount of money for any one Norwegian club. Now, really, Bodø Glimt, through smart trading, and you were talking about player trading before, through consistent success, they've won 4 out of the last 5 leagues. Yeah, they've built themselves this almost impenetrable fortress. And what it does to domestic competition, I mean, I don't watch Norwegian football every week, but I would love to know, because if they take the money that they're going to get from the Champions League group stage and a minimum of 4 home matches, and not having to market share with any other team, of course, because there are going to be no other Norwegian teams in it, it gives them the sort of money where they should win the league for the next 10 years in a row, unless they do something horribly wrong in that time. So I think
I might add to that, Andy, then when we turn our attention briefly to the conference, really big moment for Irish football, because there is a real opportunity now that not 1 but 2 teams will qualify for the Conference League, which is almost unheard of. Shelbourne beat Linfield from the northern part of the island by 3-1. They will fancy their chances when they go across the border. And Shamrock Rovers, the point I was going to make about them, their great run in the conference last year has given them more money than all the other teams in the Irish League put together. And we've seen the effect of this now. They went away, Andy, to Santa Clara, the most westerly club ever to play in Europe. They're out in the Azores there, the Portuguese team, and they won 2-1. Which,
it's a remarkable result.
Cover well. It's a great result for Shamrock, and I fully expect them to go through now. I expect both the teams from the Republic of Ireland to go through. Obviously, Crystal Palace are among the favourites. If Shakhtar qualify, will they be one of the teams that will challenge Crystal Palace, Andy?
Yeah, I think they could. Obviously, Ukrainian football's not in its best moment at the moment because Ukraine is not at its best moment right now. But if you look at the investment that has been made there in the last couple of years, the re-influx of Brazilians into Shakhtar, and the fact they're still able to develop them. I mean, Kevin, you would imagine, will go before the end of this transfer window, and they'll end up tripling their money on him. So, look, there's the possibility they've already started recruiting to replace. So, look, I think they could be an interesting sleeper. Also, interesting on keeping an eye on both Strasbourg, who drew the home leg 0-0 with Brøndby, so they've got to go to Denmark and get a result. Liam Rosinia's team, of course, and let's keep an eye out for Besiktas, who drew the first leg with Lausanne 1-1.
Listen, Andy, thank you very, very much indeed. So, World Cup previewed, Champions League previewed. Now let's return to league football as the leagues all over the continent start to kick back into life for what should be a brilliant winter of football and into spring and the early summer of next year prior to the World Cup. Every bit of it we'll try and bring to you as entertaining as we possibly can, as we always do here on Trans Europe Express, where once again, we thank you for listening to us on a Sunday night when you could be doing any number of things that most people regard as a better use of your time. Andy will take us around the leagues next here on talkSPORT. Andy, I didn't mention when I was getting super excited about Tommy Fleetwood winning the FedEx Cup The prize money for that tournament alone is $10 million to the winner, which means that he has won one tournament, that one, in his career in America, but has now earned north of 50 million of your American dollars. Nice work if you can get it.
Decent.
I think it's fair to say. I got so excited about actual sport, I forgot the important thing, the money. But now I just remembered to mention it. Andy, let's then go around the leagues. Interesting how the landscape of Europeans' power over football is tilting now, where we're seeing leagues like Turkey and Portugal, very powerful and historically important leagues in Europe, starting to get predated by the big Saudi clubs.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we've seen a couple of transfer sagas. Well, one saga and one potential saga this week in Turkey and Portugal, which are quite indicative of where Saudi football is trying to do its shopping now going forward. So we saw this week Barış Yilmaz, who of course has been brilliant for Galatasaray for a couple of years and really good for the Turkish national team as well, sometimes playing as a de facto centre forward in the absence of anyone else to do it, had his head turned by Lyon, of course, the newly promoted team who've signed some big European names, including Alex Lacazette. Said Benrahma came across from Lyon to go there when they were still in second tier, of course. Marcin Bulka, the goalkeeper, turned down Sunderland so he could go to Lyon. And they made a little effort for Barış as well. Now, they have offered him, obviously, an absolutely huge salary, a salary that is head-turning, which is reported to be 7 times what he earns at Galatasaray, because, of course, as a domestic player, rather than a big foreign signing, he's on a different type of contract. He's not on a Victor Osimhen type contract. And this has turned his head. Galatasaray said no. There's been a bit of back and forth. Now, Okan Buruk, after the 4-0 win at Kayserispor today, in which, by the way, Victor Osimhen and Leroy Sané scored their first goals of the season, in Leroy Sané's case, his first goal for Galatasaray. He said, look, we have to understand that Barış is young. He might have made a mistake. He's had his head turned, and understandably so, but he's part of the family. We have to protect him. He's still important to us. And I think to have someone like Okan Buruk to get everyone to take a deep breath, which is quite difficult to do in this sort of situation, is really, really important. But bearing in mind some of the salaries being offered to players coming to the Turkish Super League, maybe this is something that we didn't quite anticipate. Now, another thing that hasn't been anticipated, and Porto, of course, rebuilding under André Villas-Boas this season, is a move coming for a big Portuguese talent. Now, Rodrigo Moura, who looked fantastic in the back half of last season when Porto were doing really badly, someone who could become maybe Portugal's most special player going forward. Only 18 years old and looks unbelievable. Signed a big new contract in the summer to tie him down. It seems he's also the subject of interest from Saudi. Now, I think for a lot of people, seeing an 18-year-old future of Portugal type player going to the Saudi Pro League would be a bitter pill to swallow. But the fact that Francesco Farioli wants to take his time with him and has left him out of the first 11 so far this season. They won 4-0 against Casa Pia today. Borja Sainz, who's just come over from Norwich, scored a couple of goals. And Mora just came on as a late substitute. It seems that maybe someone around him feels there is some money to be made and is maybe taking advantage of that situation. Now, it's been reported that Jorge Mendes is very involved in talks to maybe move him over to Saudi, perhaps so he can be with Joao Felix and Cristiano Ronaldo, and maybe that's the idea, that all of Portugal's cream, the youngsters are learning from the old guys in the Saudi Pro League, and the Saudi Pro League is the future. To me, it doesn't feel as if this would be for the benefit of the player.
No, and of course you then have the further issue that people saying, well, he can go to Saudi Arabia and he may have a great career there, or he may become so good that the big Champions League clubs might want to get him back. But by then he's already earning so much money that transfer itself becomes very, very difficult. And when the player himself might turn and say, right now I want to go and play for Bayern Munich or whoever it is, Paris Saint-Germain, and suddenly you're earning so much money that you become an impossible transfer again. Look, we're not complaining. I mean, I've got, Saudi Arabia has the money. We all know the issues with it as a regime, but they have the money and the players will want to go there. But watching very young players being attracted there is a whole different thing. Speaking of very young, relatively young players, are we in a position, Andy, where Kelly's rule is that by and large, with the exception of the Lampard family, the sons are never as good as the fathers? Could Ruben van Bommel appear to do the almost impossible and be better than his father, Marco, who I thought was a great player?
Well, he's quicker than his dad, and he's quicker than his dad. Not just quicker than his dad now, he's quicker than his dad ever was. I think it's important to point this out.
His dad made up by being, how can I put this, combative.
Yeah, like maybe you can run past me, but maybe you don't want to try running past me. Was very much Van Bommel Senior's vibe, wasn't it? For Ruben van Bommel, who's just arrived at PSV, he's looked great in the opening weeks of the season. Scored another terrific goal in their 4-2 win over Groningen. And look, PSV are really entertaining again. If you bear in mind how their title challenge and certainly their challenge in the Champions League sort of fell apart last season. Of course, they managed to recover and win it from Ajax in the last couple of games of the season. So they are still champions under Peter Bosz. They still look defensively an absolute mess at the start of this season.
It's a Peter Bosz trademark.
It is a Peter Bosz trademark. But you know what? They're so fun going forward. I really don't care about any of that. And when we're looking at Ajax trying to re-Ajax themselves, post Fagioli, post Henderson, make themselves exciting again, even if they are leading the line without Weghorst. And, he's got his uses. I accept, he's a very hard-working player, all the rest of it, very effective. I think it's really interesting seeing what PSV are doing at the moment. A couple of young Americans involved as well. Esmir Bajratovic was brilliant this weekend, got his first 2 goals for the first team after coming on as sub at half-time. They really are super fun. So, yeah, more PSV, please.
Yes, we'll about Weghorst there. I've never heard a player, well, I have, because it's this show, damned with such faint praise. He got his first goal of the season for Ajax, it should be said as well.
He did.
So, and I love these weeks when the Champions League and other European competitions come into, back into our focus, because I want to hear about your travel arrangements. Where are you going this week? What football matches are you going to see?
You know what? My plan would have been going to see Santa Clara at Shamrock. But, of course, we'll be talking over the Champions League draw on Thursday on talkSPORT. So I'll be required to be at home for that.
Yeah, that is an amazing journey that Santa Clara players have got to make now. The Azores are, 2,000 kilometres out into the Atlantic Ocean?
No direct flight, they tell me.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised to hear that, but because it is a holiday destination, I am surprised to actually hear that. But thank you very, very much indeed. But that, I'm afraid, is the end of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. I think next week we'll be starting at the later time of 10 o'clock for various reasons. So set your watches for that. Me and Andy will be back then 10 till 1. Remember, tomorrow I'll be back on H&J at about 1:15 in the afternoon with my very serious review of everything that's happened in the Premier League over the weekend. I've got a couple of matches I've still got to watch between now and then. Coming up next here on talkSPORT itself, it's up front with Sir Les Ferdinand. And that means and in our poll, a big majority think that Harry Kane will be the leading non-Premier League scorer in the upcoming Champions League. Just remains for me to say, as always, listen to our podcast. God bless you all and good night.